This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. There's a lot going on today. I think that the lurch towards a police state on the other side of the Atlantic has moved on apace since we gathered yesterday. We may give a little nod towards that. And of course, the curious world we inhabit, where more attention is paid to Greta Thunberg's attempt to highlight the failure or the impossibility of getting aid into Gaza than has actually previously been paid to the impossibility of getting aid into Gaza. We'll be having a look at that a little later in the programme, I suspect, as well. But we begin with yesterday's U-turn. Do you know, there's a little bit of me that feels almost nostalgic for that kind of story. You think about how much of the time we spend together these days involves tracking the delusional or at best, or the apocalyptic at worst, covering stories that feel epochal. The notion, for example, yesterday of the United States lurching into fascistic authoritarianism, which doesn't even sound like hyperbole anymore. The idea of a simple domestic political story, a government doing something, we gathering at 10 o'clock of a morning to discuss its popularity or salience, and then the government undoing it, and we gather again at 10 o'clock the following morning to discuss its popularity or salience. I like the openness that's required to admit a mistake, but I don't know where the line is between weakness and honesty. I don't even know if there is a line. U-turns are weak ever since Margaret Thatcher delivered that infamous or famous speech in which she insisted she would never undertake one. And yet, of course, and this is why I find the perforation, if you like, of the line between weakness and honesty. Are they the right words? Are they the two twin poles between which we're trying to steer a course, or which the government is trying to steer a course? Weakness and honesty. So Margaret Thatcher perceived it always as weakness to undertake a U-turn. And that at some point involved dishonesty, because her failure to admit the error of her poll tax essentially did for her. An inability to tell the truth. When does a U-turn become the right thing to do? And when, of course, it's more or less the same moment, when does it stop being the wrong thing to do? If Keir Starmer had undone it a week after announcing it, would it have looked better or worse than waiting the best part of a year? I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I thought sometimes as I ask you a question out loud, even if I've asked myself the same question in my head 100 times, I don't know what the answer is until I ask you out loud. Would it have looked better if he'd done it after a week or a month than if they had done it after the best part of a year? I still don't know. Should we go for third time lucky? I'll ask you for the third time and see if an answer pops into my head. Would it have been better if Keir Starmer had U-turned on the winter fuel payments after a week or a month as opposed to the best part of a year? Would it have looked stronger or weaker? Stronger or weaker? Weaker or stronger? Stronger? No, it's not happening. This might be, of course, because I've had last week off, so my synapses perhaps aren't firing quite as viciously or as violently as they do when I'm fully back in the zone. But I don't know. And then, of course, you come to the question of whether or not the U-turn has been undertaken because of its unpopularity. And that would mean they've failed to make the case for it. It wouldn't mean that they've come to realise what the policy really contained, because they've known from the outset what the policy really contained. They have failed to sell it to the people. I'm increasingly worried about the way in which our media appears not just to have learned nothing from its hysterical support for everything from Brexit to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss's budget, but they are doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. Extraordinary story in the news over the last 24 hours about the BBC. Senior Lord High Panjandrums at the BBC instructing the troops to start pandering more to the positions held by supporters of Nigel Farage. Good God, what's happened to the BBC? Obviously, if you listen to this programme, you'll be aware of this creep towards cowardice and the speed at which that creep is now being undertaken. But the idea that you look at the disasters visited upon this country by that wing of British politics, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, even austerity, and think we need more of that, either as an electorate or as a media. We need to cheerlead for more of that. It's remarkable. So whenever I say things like they haven't sold it very well to the public, the winter fuel cuts, I don't know how they could have done. I don't know how they could have done. I was listening to a podcast by a very bright young fellow. He says, sounding as if he's on a diet of Werther's Originals. There's a very bright young fellow who makes podcasts who goes by the name, and I don't think this is his baptismal name. He goes by the name of Jimmy the Giant. And some teenagers of my acquaintance are very taken with the clarity of his expression, and they got me to listen to a couple of his podcasts, and I was very, very impressed. But he had one on the role that the media plays in these kind of decisions about discourse, you'd describe it as, the way in which public conversation, public discourse is defined by newspapers traditionally, even as they become so unpopular now that most of them won't even reveal their circulation details. But the public discourse is defined by these kind of conversations. And you look around, the BBC now sadly falling into lockstep with the likes of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph. But you look around and you wonder how Labour could have sold this better. And yet it still looks like a capitulation, doesn't it? It looks like a capitulation. So that's your first question at 9 minutes after 10 this morning. Is where do you think, I guess using this as a lens through which to ask the question. So it's a question about the winter fuel allowance. Where is the line between, does it look weak, or honest isn't quite the right word, pragmatic? Can it be both? Is it weak and pragmatic? Where does it go? I don't know, I'm afraid to say, because I feel I should have a stronger opinion on this. I think they've done the right thing, but it's a disaster that they've done it in the circumstances that they've done it, and a disaster that they did the thing they had to undo in the first place. So 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Does this make the Labour government, does it make Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves look better or worse than they did before the U-turn was announced? I think that's probably the simplest way to ask the question. If you honestly think it makes them look worse, then they have somehow contrived to double down on a disastrous policy announcement. But I don't quite see at the moment, I can hear my opinion forming now in the back of my mind, I don't really see, if you didn't like the announcement, how you can think that undoing it would be a bad thing. This has to make them look better than it did before they undid it, but they could still look worse than they did before they originally announced it. So that's the question about the policy, about the U-turn, about the politics. 0345 6060 973. And that, I suppose, there's also room for a question about why you think they did it, given that the necessity of undoing it became pretty clear pretty quickly. But that's the question, the line between weakness and honesty, between the stupidity of saying I will never undertake a U-turn, even when the evidence that I've made a mistake becomes incontrovertible. But against that, you set the fear that too many U-turns makes you look as if you don't really believe in anything and you are flip-flopping and flim-flamming and wobbling all over the place. So that's question number one. Book your place early on the switchboard for that one. 0345 6060 973. Then the bit that's a little uncomfortable. And it was partly informed by a caller to yesterday's programme. And it was the point about, I don't know if this is true, the point about a kind of legacy of very warm sentiment towards older generations that is post-war. So when I was growing up, people of a certain age had either served in or survived the Second World War. It was a chronological given. It was a simple, it wasn't an opinion, it was counting. And that meant that any attempt to render their existence less pleasant than it currently was felt quite repellent, actually. I wonder whether Captain Tom was one of the last emblems of this national feeling. This idea that the people who fought in the war or the people who survived the war had a different status in our collective consciousness than people who didn't. The fight against Nazism in particular being so acute and so clearly understood, that people actively involved in it assumed a status among the rest of the population that was unquestioned. You deserve to be looked after because of the Second World War. And a caller suggested yesterday that the legacy, that feeling survives. It explains the political reluctance to do anything that might diminish the existence of pensioners, even though now they are unlikely to have had anything at all to do with the Second World War. They are categorically not going to have fought in it, or they are highly unlikely to have survived it. So we've still got that. I don't want to say fetishization. It's two reasons. One, it's a word I use far too much, and it conjures up images of sort of gimp suits. Nothing wrong with that, by the way, but I'm just saying it's not helpful necessarily in the context of this conversation. And reason number two is that it sounds like a negative. And I don't necessarily want it to sound like a negative. What would be a better word to use in this context about the kind of it's a reverence that we adopt for the older generation? There's a political pragmatism to it as well, because you are more likely to vote. And remember, as I speak, I edge ever closer to the category that I'm describing. When I first started doing this job, I don't think I could conceive of ever being an old age pensioner myself. Nowadays, there are mornings when I can't wait to retire. No offence, Keith, but that's just the way it goes. I kind of find myself thinking that the political pragmatism of looking after people who are more likely to vote is only part of the story. Why was the winter fuel policy so unpopular, despite the fact that it would only have affected, really negatively, a very small number of people? Most pensioners could have afforded it, which is leading us towards the next question, by the way. So that bit there about why we revere old people, and whether we should continue to do so in the context of the post-war period. Because, listen, nearly 500,000 pensioners, that's the only figure of pensioners who haven't repaid their mortgage. The massive majority of home-owning pensioners have paid off their mortgage entirely. And now they're getting a cut-off point of £35,000, which is why I use the word reverence, because that doesn't seem to me to make economic sense. You know, how many people listening to this program now are getting by, even raising a family, on less than that? I sometimes get very embarrassed by the level of shock that I feel when I'm exposed to other people's economic reality. We all live in bubbles, and none of us are perfect, but I mean, sometimes you listen to people who do what I do for a living and seem to be utterly unaware of what poverty looks like. The idea that you can run out of money before you run out of month. The idea that people can't actually afford that. Just the concept of nothing seems to be beyond a lot of people who work in the media and on the right of British politics. The concept of nothing. The concept of running out of money before you have run out of month, and not being able to, rely on your overdraft or phone your mum, or just not literally being able to get your hands on a few quid to tide you over until payday. God only knows what you do if the boiler blows up, or if the car breaks down, or if you have a massive outlay in circumstances where you can't afford to even look after little outlays. But I still get gobsmacked when I learn about the threshold for getting free school meals, for example, and the number of families that are in that threshold, even before the government announced its changes this week. The idea that you're getting by on less than 10 grand a year. And you discover now that the government thinks that for pensioners, for people who aren't working, an income of £35,000, or an income, to go all Mr. Micawber on you again, an income of £34,999 is so low that you need help paying your heating bills, but only if you're an old age pensioner. An income of £34,999 is sufficiently low to merit an extra payment when people are going to be working full-time and raising families on a fraction. Not a fraction, but on in some cases, considerably less than that sum. So there are two questions here, possibly three. maybe even more. Depends how much attention you've been paying. The first is the simple politics of the policy reversal, the policy U-turn, for good or for ill, weakness or strength. And do they emerge from this better than they went into it? 0345 6060 973. And the second is a very personal question. I just want you to tell me, and I'm not going to over-egg this pudding, because I really want you to come at me with the straight-up answer to the question of how that figure of £35,000 hits you. I can't really play myself this game for reasons that I've just outlined. My luck and privilege is such that it is a question that's almost beyond my ken. But how does it hit you? That figure of £35,000, whether you're a pensioner on one side of it or t'other, or whether you're nowhere near pension age, how does that figure of £35,000 hit you? 0345 6060 973. And just to put the pressure on, a quick word from Vinny, who got in touch a few moments ago to say, "Hi James, I just wanted to mark the quality of the callers on yesterday's show, especially the Americans." And he adds, "Surely our show has the highest quality callers in the history of talk radio." And I love two things about that. Number one, the obvious truth of the compliment. He's absolutely right. And number two, he says our show. Don't text me again and tell me it was a typo and you've missed off the Y, because I love the fact you've put our show. That's kind of why I get out of bed every morning. It is our show, and the quality of the calls is the highest in the business. And guess what? You're about to prove it.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time even. This feels, writes Lauren, totally alien to me. £35,000. I've never seen that kind of cash. And John writes, pensioners and the winter fuel threshold. Yes, it does make the government look weak. They should have taken the first year to work out the threshold to implement. I've always felt that the national minimum wage should have been the threshold. That's £488 a week. If the government feel that's what you need to survive in the UK, my brackets, when working, then why wouldn't that threshold apply for everyone? It can go up as the national living wage goes up, then you can do away with the triple lock and the winter fuel allowance. I don't know about the complications of that, but I like the simple heft of the point that 35 grand looks about 10 grand too high. I don't know. I want to know what you think. Ian's in Waterloo. Ian, what do you think?
Hi, James. I think that the threshold is far too high, £35,000 with no expenses. You know, they've got no mortgage, they've got no rent to pay, whereas somebody younger is having to shell out.
Some do, but you're generalising, and you're quite right to do so. I mean, there is a huge disproportion of homeowners compared to younger generations, and a relatively small number of people paying rent who, of course, will get help with that rent in addition to the winter fuel allowance. And if they've got an income of 35 grand plus, then they're pretty good for the rent anyway.
And of course, 35,000 for people that are actually owning other homes that people are renting. So they're getting their money from the youngsters. And it's just, I think that the guy yesterday who mentioned the war, these are people that were brought up in the swinging 60s and through the 70s and bought their houses in the 80s and 90s for very little money. And of course, it's exploded and they're sitting on such assets now. And so many of them are on buy-to-let, and I think it's hugely unfair. I think there's this distinction between young and old, and it's just getting worse and worse now. And
is that a way the government could have sold it better? Because I am fascinated by that. It's the one area which we couldn't put through AI and come up with an actual formula, but could, in a different country with a less corrupt and bent media, could a Labour government have sold this better to a population? Or, to take off my own blinkers for a moment, could a more effective government, a more effective political operation, have sold it better to a country where, you're absolutely right, the concentration of cash at the top of the age ladder is hideous?
A more competent government, certainly, a government that communicates better. They haven't communicated a lot of things very well. There's been a lot of leaks, for instance, and then for instance, Peter Kyle was it yesterday or the day before, and they leak something, and then people want to know the detail, and they say, "Oh no, we can't tell you that. We're not telling you that late. We can't tell you that at the moment. We'll tell you that at a later date." And it's just like, well, why did you leak it in the first place?
To get a headline, I don't know whether it has to be like this. I think it always has been. Not always, but you get a headline, you get a little bit of coverage. Think of it as an appetizer, and then we'll deliver the detail later, and you'll be paying attention because you've had the leak previously. But I understand your frustration. Where would you have put the figure on this? I mean, it's only 200 quid a week, 200 quid a year, or 300, I think, if you're over 80. But it's become much more than that. Two questions for you briefly. Why do you think it became so unpopular, given that you see it so differently from the people who don't like it? And we'll answer that one first.
I think it became unpopular because it's the elderly, it's the older people, and they won't talk about Alan Sugar, they won't talk about the people like that.
The king.
They will talk, the king. They'll talk about they'll talk about Doris,
yes,
who's struggling to get by. That's just over the limit of pension credit, and it works a treat. It works an absolute treat, and that's where the communication. It should have come from the government saying we're taking it off the people that are down at the golf club. We're taking it the people that go play golf in the morning, have a lunch,
and the reason why we're doing it, and nothing wrong with golf, by the way, before my inbox fills up. But the reason why we're doing it is because my colleagues in their 20s and early 30s don't know anyone who has managed to get a mortgage who hasn't already inherited money or had help from their parents.
Absolutely, yeah.
And final question, where would you put the figure then, if not 35, when, where?
I would put it at about £500 a week.
Income. So that would work out pretty close to the living wage, actually. And that's going to be, I mean, again, that's in a normal universe, that would be quite a hard circle to square, wouldn't it? Why are the people who aren't going out to work every day considered in need of help when they're at 10 grand a year better off than people who are going out to work every day? Thank you, Ian. Charlie's in Putney. Charlie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello,
you sort of touched on something that I've been saying for a while, which is...
Well, great minds, Charlie, great minds.
I know. There's this sort of like an instinctive like pearl clutching that seems to go on whenever you mention a certain things that do need attention in this country. So the benefits pensioners receive is one of them. Can't mention the triple lock and the fact that it's unsustainable. You can't mention the what we're talking about today. Obviously, you can mention it, but you can't mention the fact that when the announcement that the winter fuel allowance was going to be means tested, don't see a problem with that. Means testing, you're looking at who should receive it and who doesn't need to receive it. But that was, we can't talk about that. We can't take benefits away from people who fought in the war, despite the fact that if you're 80 years old today, you were 10 at the end of World War II. Yeah. So. The NHS, you can't mention the fact that needs reform or that needs to be addressed. And now you've got one generation effectively dictating policy, despite the fact that they receive more benefits than any other generation has or will likely ever will.
And yet, even as you speak, you can feel the political toxicity of what you're describing, can't you? Because Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher. Yep. Some people call Keir Starmer the kid starver. I don't know what nickname they'd come up with to describe somebody who punched a pensioner, but I mean, there it is. It would be the pensioner puncher, wouldn't it?
You got Lewis Goodall touched on this as well when he was covering for you, and very predictably, one of the callers was outraged at what he was talking about. Actually told Lewis that that phone-in was going to be responsible for reform getting in power. But I mean,
why don't these people ring me anymore? It's not fair.
You, James.
No, it's not that. It's because I'm too rude. That must be the reason.
Graduates, the average starting salary for a graduate in this country is £30,000, and they're leaving university with more debt than ever, no hopes of ever getting on the housing ladder, and receiving less help than people who own their own houses. I mean, me and my wife, so our combined income, I'm on 65, my wife's on 75, very good incomes, right? We're not asking for handouts, but our savings for our house is in the lifetime ISA account, right? The maximum house price you can use that for is 450k. As house prices are continuously going up, our prospects are dwindling, right? What we can get for that 450k is getting lower and lower. Now, given all that Rachel Reeves has moaned about people not investing in UK equity, trying to force people to invest in UK equity, wouldn't it make sense to increase that threshold? Because my wife and I would immediately start pouring more and more money into those stocks and share LISA accounts. But there's no attention whatsoever on that. There's news that they're going to miss the targets of building, 1.5 million houses this year. Yeah. There's absolutely no thought going into that. It's all focused on one generation.
It feels that way, doesn't it? And you're closer to the pinch point than I am. I'm not going to be under any illusions about that. I don't want anyone to think I'm pretending otherwise. But but all roads lead back to property, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know. But with this, why even announce the plans to means test it if there was ever scope to scale it back to what we've got now? Why even do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, then we're back to bad political communication, which I guess I can't keep chalking up to a corrupt media. At some point, you have to acknowledge that the communications coming out of Downing Street are appalling. I mean, U-turns, in a way, are a consequence of a failure to successfully sell a policy or a principle. In this case, it was a policy. In the poll tax, it was a principle. And the principle was rotten. And Thatcher was so blinded by her own successes and self-regard by the time that the poll tax riots came about that she wouldn't be told. And that's where a U-turn becomes necessary and impossible. But this U-turn, I don't know. It's so interesting the way the calls have gone so far. Living up to Vinny's billing, I think we can confidently say so far, because it's detail. And the climb down the U-turn seems to be a response to feeling, not fact. I also, and this is a little bit bonkers, everyone came back from the council election saying that this was the big thing on the doorstep. There was a little bit of me, don't laugh, right? There was a little bit of me that thought, well, that's because of who's in when you're doing your canvassing. I know that people also do canvassing outside of office hours, but the idea that the people most likely to come to the door if there's somebody outside with a rosette on. You check your Ring doorbell, or you have a look through the bathroom window. There's someone outside with a rosette on. I'm not opening the door, whatever colour the rosette. Well, I might try and waste an hour of somebody's time if they're particularly. But I just wonder whether pensioners were overrepresented on the doorstep and Labour got the willies over that a little prematurely or even perhaps excess. I don't know. I said I was thinking out loud. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. Two messages here that sum things up pretty neatly. How strange. We always need to protect the pensioners who all their lives have had a house, jobs, cars, holidays. They even voted against youngsters' freedoms. These are all generalisations, and they object to housing. They don't want it in their backyard. They protest against solar panels. But hey, we need cheap heat for them. And again, I stress, I understand the generalisation. It's statistically sound, but obviously there'll be lots and lots of people who are of a certain age and do not fall into the categories that Greta is describing there. Whereas Janet has heard something quite different. Janet writes, at it again, demonise the old. You will all be old one day unless you die. I don't have a mortgage, but I pay out £3,500 for my husband's care. Don't worry, we won't get the winter fuel allowance. I'm genuinely sorry, Janet, that this programme, or at least my contributions to it, have reached your ears in that way. Nobody for a moment is suggesting that old people should be demonised, or indeed that £200 a year would make any difference at all to the £3,500 a month you've got to spend on your husband's care. It's more about an attempt, and I hope this doesn't sound patronising, to see society as a whole and to wonder why a government would prioritise this relatively large number of people. I mean, originally this was actually going to involve 10.8 million people going from eligibility down to 1.5 million. So they were going to take the best part of over 9 million people out of the equation, and now 9 million people are going to get it again. So it's more about why the message of prioritisation being sent to young people working and in many cases earning less than 35,000 is being prioritised over them, over people who've probably got children living at home, who've probably got outgoings far in excess of what you would have as an old age pensioner, who've probably got mortgage payments or rent payments to make that a majority of pensioners will not have. So it's just it's a strange prioritisation. But please trust me when I say nobody's demonising pensioners. And in many ways, pensioners paying $3,500 a month for each other's care are so far out of this conversation, so far out of this financial picture that as I say, I'm a little surprised that you thought we were talking about you. 10:37 is the time. Ken's in Leeds. Ken, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Ken.
I reckon that this is all about the actual financial state of this country.
Yeah.
Because everybody that's got a point of view has got a valid point of view, really. Nobody's got enough money. And there isn't enough money for services and police and all that, the rest of it.
Yeah.
The reason for calling is that my impression of £35,000 is that's double my income. So I will, I hope, get the winter fuel allowance because it's vital.
Yes.
When you're on that kind of an income, I'm on 18,500 a year, and my monthly expenses are about £840, and so the rest of it has to go on food, on light and heat, on fuel. I run a car because I live in a rural area, and I volunteer to take people to hospital and doctors and things like that. So, it's pretty tight. But I do recognise that, young people, with the cost of houses, it's absolutely outrageous.
I mean, again, we're coming back to the same territory. The government have affected or tried to build a wall between the two. Not in a negative way, but they're just announcing a U-turn and selling it to the population and sort of saying, don't look over there at other people who are really struggling. Just give us credit for looking after this bunch of people. Yeah. And yet I struggle to apply the word struggle to people who are living on double what you're currently living on.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be high on the hog if I had that much money coming in. It'd be tremendous. But I mean, holidays are a thing of the past.
Yes.
It's really, really difficult to get by. Anything happening to the car is a disaster.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
It's just, I'm not crying the poor tail. I consider that I'm okay. But I just think the £35,000 limit is stretching things a little.
Well, it'd be interesting to know how they've settled on it. It's sort of around about the average salary, the average annual salary, but it's way ahead of the national living wage, for example, or various other thresholds. Why do you think, Ken, the policy was so unpopular? Why? I mean, was it a bad policy? Was it bad politics?
I think it's quite simple, James. It's taking something away from people that they were used to getting. I think that it's as simple as that. Yeah. It's like, taking the food off my plate. Yeah. That's the kind of thing. That was my attitude to it. I was annoyed about it, but there you go. But
they didn't make it feel necessary. They didn't make it feel necessary, and
no, they didn't.
They didn't. I don't know. We'll never know, will we? Where the line is between a failure of communication and a failure of policy, like bad policy and bad comms. It's going to be both, but there'll be a ratio there. It might even be 52-48. Ken, thank you, and take care. 10:40 is the time. Please stop apologising, says Ben. You can't win in this job, can you? I mean, half the time I got people say, are you going to apologise for not talking about this, that or the other? And I say, well, I talked about it yesterday. It's not my fault you weren't listening. Are you going to apologise for not listening? We'd be in a constant cycle of apology if we were to. But now I'm being told off for apologising, for generalising on behalf of the older generation. They generalise all the time about younger generations, so for once it's good they're on the receiving end of negative generalisation, says Ben in Woking, who's 24 years old. Two wrongs do not make a right, grasshopper. And so you can't necessarily object to somebody else doing something by saying, I wish we could do it to them. But anyway, I'm generalising. Emily's in Croydon. Emily, what would you like to say?
Hiya.
Hello.
So I work for a small charity in South London.
Yes.
And we support a lot of people in various projects that we do. And a lot of that is informing them of different schemes and funds that they might be eligible for.
Yes.
So these are people who are on very low income.
How low?
And,
How low?
Obviously, I don't know each of their individual circumstances, but a lot of the time they're already engaging with kind of a separate charity, and that might be how we come into contact with them.
Okay.
So one of the things that I spoke about, I've been in this role for a couple of years, is the winter fuel payment. And obviously there was a massive change from the year before last to last year / this year's winter. Because I had to say, now you have to be in receipt of guaranteed pension credit.
Yes.
And I would like to point out to people, if they don't know, that the threshold for people to receive guaranteed pension credit is they have to be earning less than £227.10 per week if you're a single person. And the reason why I'm pointing out that figure is because one of your previous callers said, I think around £500 a week, that would be fair as a threshold for this. And the point is that there are a lot of people maybe earning, literally £228 a week, and that means they're not eligible for the pension credit, which means they're not eligible for the winter fuel payment.
But that's it. But there's a world of difference. There's a world of difference between 227 and 500. There is. It's 100%. So you're both right. He's right to say 500 sounds about right. You're right to say 227 was too low. But the government have gone 10 grand higher than the highest of those two figures.
Yeah. And I will say that, I don't know exactly where they've got that £35,000 figure from.
I think national average salary is the closest I can find until someone tells me different.
But I would I'd just like to say the experience of, and it's worth mentioning probably that I'm 26, so I fall squarely into the category of people who do feel like, they've been shafted by the state of the economy and the housing market and stuff like that. Like, I still have to live at home. I can't afford to rent out.
But a lot of this generation will tell you, and I'm generalising, for which I'm not going to apologise on this occasion, thanks to Ben. But the reason why you're still living at home is because you spend all your money on Netflix subscriptions and avocado toast.
Okay, well, that's not true. But the only reason why I'm mentioning that is because I don't begrudge old people getting help that they need. When I'm there speaking to, it's upwards of 50 people, 100 people sometimes, talking about the fact that they're not going to be getting the winter fuel payment anymore. This is obviously before this announcement. People are deeply upset and deeply worried because they can't afford to live.
Yeah, but we're talking about so many different... I don't know what happened to my voice there, sorry. So many different constituencies. No one disputes, or I beg your pardon, some do, but no one... talking so far on this programme today disputes the notion that people who need it should get it. It's a question of where the line is between need and don't need. And they seem to have... I mean, the numbers are extraordinary, Emily. When you look at the graph in sort of graphic form, before means testing, 10.8 million people were eligible. After the last policy, the one you're describing, the pension credits qualification, was brought in, 1.5 million people were eligible. But now, after they've loosened the means testing to its £35,000 threshold, it goes up from 1.5 million to 9 million. So they've almost undone all of it. And there's no earthly way that 9 million pensioners need it, is there?
I don't know. But
come on. No way do they need it.
But the point that I'm trying to make is I think that there's a lot of people in this country and a lot of people who've got a lot of kind of vitriol for people getting help because they don't think they deserve it, or I don't know what exactly it is. And the government beforehand, the policy felt like they were more concerned about people who shouldn't be getting it than the people who were literally like living. I can't even describe to you the circumstances that some of these people were living in. No. People crying to me, people getting really, really upset, trying to explain to me how they wouldn't be able to afford to heat their home. And, people die of the cold.
They do. You're absolutely right. And that number was likely to go up, despite the sterling work that people like you do trying to help people fully avail themselves of the help that they are entitled to. An awful lot of people don't do it either through ignorance or pride or some other factor. And I think what you've nailed best so far today, Emily, is why it was so unpopular. Because this isn't a criticism, but we skim over the numbers. I give you the numbers and I say how many of those 9 million don't really need it. And you say, I don't know. But it doesn't matter, because to generate the feeling of rejection and resentment, the dislike of this policy, you only need one example. You just need one person who's going to perish, or one person who's sitting in the only room. Some of the calls we've taken from people of all age groups over the years about the difficulties of heating their homes when the prices went through the roof will stay with me forever. They're absolutely heartbreaking. Could the government have sold it better? I mean, has it also been bad politics? You clearly welcomed the U-turn, but could they have avoided the mess that they've got themselves into?
Well, yeah, I think that they shouldn't have done it in the first place. They shouldn't have made it that restrictive. I understand bringing in some sort of means testing, but making it that restrictive, that specific.
Stick it on 25. Stick it on the national living wage. We're going to make the threshold the national living wage.
I guess, yeah, the main point I'm trying to make, and maybe I'm just repeating myself now, is that especially if you are a young person and you're feeling kind of, I don't
Squeezed.
know, hard done by and almost like blaming older people for it, it's not their fault.
No, that's a really good point.
And especially not the people that need this money the most. And one of your callers who said, they paid off their mortgage, they've done this, they've done that. A lot of older people in this country are renting or they're living in social housing.
But most aren't, and that's why I keep apologising for generalising, because, that's why I keep coming back, and I'm repeating myself now. To the 9 million figure. That will be a tiny proportion of the people you're describing. They will be mostly the 1.5 million that were still going to get it under the original announcement. The extra 7.5 million who are going to get it now, many of them will not be in need. And yet the policy, it's almost as if they've decided to go in for a penny, in for a pound. If we're going to do a U-turn, we may as well chuck it all back, or almost all of it. £35,000 as an income puts you on the national average for a working man or woman. It's insane in a way to say you need help heating your home, and yet that's where they have ended up. But no one should, or I hope has been, diminishing the existence or the experiences of the people you describe. Here's a nice one. You should hear my mother-in-law complain about how poor she is as she spies on her tenants in her paid-off buy-to-let from her paid-off bungalow and drops £90 a time on perfume that still somehow doesn't make her a less miserable person. Well, she'll be celebrating.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I mean, on the other hand, who'd be a politician, eh? They bring in a policy, everybody hates it. So they take it away, and we're moaning about that as well. There we go, got it. British values. You know how we struggle to pin down values that are uniquely British or peculiarly British. A great phrase used by often profoundly unpleasant people. British value. What are British values? There you go, moaning about everything. That's a great British value. Do other countries moan quite as much as we do? I don't know. But anyway, everybody hated it, so they removed it, and now everyone's complaining about what they've put in place instead. But both positions work. You can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. It was a brutal policy that hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt, and they have reversed it and turned it into a policy that helps people who don't need to be helped. Somewhere between those two lies the sweet spot. And I think, in the absence of a better suggestion, I'd go for the living wage as being the threshold above which people were adjudged not to need the Winter Fuel Allowance. Christian reminds us of how absent detail can be from this discourse. The comms were shocking, James, he writes. The taking away of winter fuel payments amidst a cost of living crisis for everyone meant that pensioners received a £700 annual increase as opposed to a £900 one. That's not an opinion, by the way, that's counting. They should have stressed the sugar before the bitter aftertaste. So I think for political anoraks, and for people lucky enough not to be directly affected by the numbers here, I think that's the biggest takeaway. You're allowed a year of grace, I guess, as a new government, but the first thing you do to be so cack-handed is deeply unfortunate, isn't it? Deeply unfortunate. And they could have done it better. They could possibly even have done it so well that they didn't need to undo it because of the numbers that Christian shares and the role that people eligible for it who weren't claiming it played in the entire story. Of course, as we mentioned yesterday, that raises the quite funny spectre of them ending up worse off than they were before they went into it, because they successfully persuaded so many people to sign up for the tax credits that made them eligible for the Winter Fuel Allowance that they've ended up getting hit twice. They've got to pay them the tax credits that they weren't paying them before, and now they've restored the Winter Fuel Allowances for everybody else as well. But on we go to Norwich. Terry is there. Terry, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Hi. So I'm what you would call from a low-income household is my current situation. And so my opinion on this from just a very personal point is my situation is that me and my fiancée, who is disabled, she has a rare condition called EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is essentially chronic fatigue and chronic pain.
I was reading about that this weekend. Why was I reading about that this weekend? I
don't know, but I'm really glad that you were, because it's kind of one of those that flies under the radar, and it takes ages to get a diagnosis. So it's if it's getting some airtime, then that's great. And I struggle with OCD. So I'm 31 years old. For the last 12 years, I've been working full-time up until this year, where I've had to drop down purely because I've kind of got in a situation now where I'm essentially giving part-time care for my partner.
Sure.
Sorry, I will get to the point in a moment.
No, you take your time, Terry.
And, and my health is also, OCD, I can get by, I can get into work, I can do things like that. But when you add in care to that situation, it becomes very hard to manage everything. So our kind of income is really decreased significantly. And we had to take a step which I never thought we would, which was to sign up to universal credit.
Right.
And last month, I brought in about £1,200. My partner put in about £800 because she's still working as much as she possibly can. And we were given £35 from universal credit.
Yeah.
£35. I mean, it just baffles me. Also, you're collectively over £10,000 under the threshold. I mean, I don't like politics that pits one section of society against another, but that's the road we've gone down today, because the government has decided to prioritise an old age pensioner in individual receipt of more than £10,000 of your collective income above you, and that must feel a bit weird. It does feel weird, and I want to say that I don't, it doesn't make me angry or upset with those pensioners, because it's not their fault, and also I'm realistic about it. I see it as it's separate money. It's a separate pot for the pensioners. It's a separate pot for universal credit. I'm not saying it's the same money, but I do think that it would go a long way and there's people way, way worse off than me who have got children as well. We don't have any children, Trying to live on such a low wage is really hard. By the time everything's gone out, I mean, I paid £180 last month just on electric and gas for our house. That's what we pay every single month, £180 from a budget of £2,000.
It's gonna. There are two things, and this isn't going to improve your situation or indeed or cheer you up, but two things. Whenever we talk about some subjects, they lead back to two things. The first is property, how hard it is to get on the ladder. And many people in your situation don't even dream about that. That's on a different planet of ambition.
No, that's not.
And then the other, to knit the two together, what happens when all the people working now to pay their rent are no longer working? I mean, there is a huge reckoning on the horizon for the whole of society, and that's why it seems odd for the government to be more or less ignoring families like yours and focusing instead on people who are relatively comfortably off. Yeah,
I mean, and I want the pensioners who need it to get it, absolutely.
Of course, we all do.
I completely agree with you, James, when you say there's a sweet spot, and that sweet spot is about the national living wage. I think that's exactly where it should be.
I can't see anyone complaining about it. If I'd done a phone, I mean, we may all be missing something, which would be my fault, not yours, because it's my job to get the fact out there. But I couldn't imagine opening up the phone lines today with that figure and having anybody say, no, that's outrageous. That's
I don't
unfair.
think we'd be having a conversation.
No.
I don't think that conversation would be happening. I wouldn't bat an eyelid because I think it would be legitimate. And I don't care how the people spend it as well. I don't care if someone goes on holiday with that money. It's not down to them. It's down to the government. If the government are going to give them the money, they can spend the money, whatever, So,
I agree with that as well. But it is because, of course, the threshold of fairness takes away an awful lot of the objections to what people might do with the money if they think that it has been fairly received. Terry, take care. I know a little bit about OCD, and I know that it can be absolutely hideous on bad days and bad weeks. So I do appreciate you taking the time to call in and point out the people who perhaps are not being prioritised, and in fact, of course, conversations we'll have in the coming weeks, who are being targeted by some of this government's policy. But two thoughts to end this hour with. This from No Hostages. The UK is becoming a two-class society. One inherits wealth and gets help from their parents. The other rents from the former while helping to support their own parents who can't afford care or rising bills. I can't see that gap getting anything but bigger. And the conclusion here is, if you change the level of analysis from the individual to the family, then the cross-generational conflict often disappears. There is no war but the class war. In other words, if the system is unfair, but your family is on the right side of it, even if you currently aren't, I guess Keir Starmer just got your vote.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 2 minutes after 11, and I guess in a way it makes me think of Just Stop Oil and the people who block traffic. How many times have we sat here and listened perhaps to, shall we say, less thoughtful elements of the British media discussing protests? Protests that are for the collective good rather than for the protection of wealth. So the kind of people who think you shouldn't protest about environmental catastrophe or about the carnage that's unfolding in Gaza are the kind of people who, if you offered them an opportunity to march on Parliament protesting about VAT being put on private school fees, they would probably trample you in their mad rush to Westminster Tube Station. So it's a crucial distinction between two types of protest. One is for collective good, protests against other people being deported, for example, or protests against your own wealth being limited. So the farmers will protest because they are being required to pay half of the inheritance tax that everybody else with a similar sized estate is required to pay. I don't know how stupid you would have to be to march in solidarity with them, but there's nothing stupid about being a farmer who marches to protect their own privileged inheritance status, because who here would volunteer to give up an enormous financial privilege? Takes us back to the pensioners. And so it is with Just Stop Oil, or these are people who protest in the belief, the sincere and authentic belief, that unless serious changes are made to the way the world works, then we are jeopardizing the future of our species. They are not protesting for their own financial to protect their own financial situation or the wealth that they hope to pass on to their children. So two types of protesters, two types of protest. Protest for the public good. You may disagree about what the public good is, but you can't disagree about these two types of protests. And protests for the protection, the preservation of a status quo which favours you, right? So there it is. Which brings us to Greta Thunberg, who is in many ways the face of public protest on the environmental front. She is in many ways the rallying point. There was always a tragedy, not a tragedy, there was always a big problem on the horizon for Greta Thunberg. Do you know what it was? Looking back now, it was blindingly obvious what it was. But I'm not sure we fully clocked it at the time. She didn't get a free pass. Even as a schoolgirl, she was exposed to vicious abuse, hideous abuse online, which some people have suggested that her neurodiversity may have equipped her with an ability to rise above it in the way that other people may not have been able to. But she was always going to get older. So the hatred that is reserved for people who protest for the public good, people who challenge a status quo that rewards fossil fuel companies and the richest people on the planet are given everything they need to grow ever richer, while the rest of us, as the last hour reminded us, often move in the opposite direction. Anybody who stands up for that is painting a target on their back that is almost impossible to conceive of. And somehow she managed to swerve the worst excesses of that by being so young and by being possessed of such courage, such a personality that she possessed. But they were always going to come for her, regardless of what she did next, because you can't sustain a system that pollutes the planet and continues to enrich the richest people on it at the expense of the survival potentially of the species, without crushing dissent, without silencing all criticism. What you see Donald Trump doing with regard to his immigration policies at the moment is a sort of microcosm of what the world has been doing since 1959 when it comes to fossil fuels and climate change. But then she began to campaign in other areas as well, most obviously and most recently against the continuing blockade of Gaza. Hands up, and you have to be completely honest about this, hands up if you knew that it was impossible to get anything into Gaza and had been for weeks. Hands up if you knew that the place was under an effective blockade. How many people, hands up if you know how many people have been killed by the Israeli army in the last week or the last fortnight. Hands up if you know how many people have been shot dead while trying to get their hands on some of the pitiful amounts of aid that are being allowed into the region under an Israeli and American plan that is objected to by pretty much everybody else on the planet. Go on, hands up. Hands up. Do you see what I mean? Because we always end up circling back to the same space when we talk about protests for the public good. And that is, I wish they wouldn't do it, but if they didn't, then we wouldn't be talking about it. Yesterday, if you didn't want to talk about the ongoing carnage in Gaza, you would have been talking instead about an ill-advised little film that Dawn French made on social media and then apologised for and deleted. So if you don't want to acknowledge, particularly if you've been a full-throated cheerleader for everything that Benjamin Netanyahu has done since the October the 7th atrocity, you'd probably rather talk about Dawn French than the death toll. You'd probably rather talk about Greta Thunberg than the dead aid workers. You'd probably rather talk about any of these things than the 54,000 Palestinians killed in the fighting, mostly as a result of Israeli airstrikes, rendering Gaza one of, if not the most dangerous war zone in the world. So Greta Thunberg decided to draw attention to the blockade in the first instance and the bigger situation in the second, in the sort of broader. And as I'm pretty sure she knew would happen, she got, what word do you prefer now? Captured, kidnapped, incarcerated, confiscated, arrested? I don't know if she was arrested. What word do you prefer? Israeli commandos boarded the ship and the pro-Palestinian activists put their hands up. So I don't know what word you prefer to use in those circumstances. I don't know if anybody thought that they would get to Gaza on the ship called the Madeleine. And of course they were carrying only a small amount of aid. But the message was pretty obvious. The world should not turn a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians. And that's where we come in. Did it work? And how do you answer that question? So here's a headline that the Times newspaper ran with today. Phones overboard as Greta's, quotes, selfie yacht, end quotes, mission is sunk. Selfie yacht, I think, is the description that was applied to the mission by the Israeli government, and headline writers all over the place have decided to run with it. It's not a value-free word, is it? That's not a value-free headline. Even if you stick it in quotes, you're electing to describe these events in the language that the Israeli administration prefers. You're not describing it, for example, as a humanitarian mission. Phones overboard as Greta's humanitarian mission is sunk. Phones overboard as Greta's attempt to draw attention to the ongoing blockade is sunk. And that is what informs my question, because wherever you look at this story, you find yourself wondering how distorting is the lens through which we're looking at it. Because, listen, if there's any doubt at all, what they have done is courageous and important. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has been effective. People who would rather talk about Greta Thunberg than dead aid workers have been talking about Greta Thunberg. Yesterday they were probably talking about Dawn French. But are they ever going to apologise, or to go back to a theme in the last hour, for their full-throated support of everything Benjamin Netanyahu has done long after it became clear what his intentions were? Of course they're not. They'd rather talk about Greta Thunberg. But the alternative to talking about Greta Thunberg was not talking about dead aid workers or starving children. The alternative was not to talk about it at all. And always in danger of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Perfect world. Well, there'd be no killing in Gaza. There'd have been no October the 7th atrocity. There would be no need for aid, let alone a blockade of aid. But we don't live in a perfect world. So we live in gradations of imperfection. And in a less imperfect world, journalists would be allowed in to Gaza. In a less imperfect world, these children would be fed. You wouldn't put the prisoners in charge, you wouldn't put the prison guards in charge of the care packages, would you? In a less imperfect world, that would be an obvious thing to do. So 3 a.m. local time yesterday morning, the boat was covered with white foam, which the media in Israel said was non-harmful paint used to obscure it during boarding. Make of that what you will. They refused to turn around, and soldiers used paint which is not harmful or dangerous to stop the boat violating the blockade, the blockade that stops people from delivering aid to Gaza. The activists said they were prepared and had all practiced for this. And one of them described the deployment of this paint as them dropping chemicals on us. I don't know, because we haven't been able to hear from them yet. We for a while didn't even know where they were. But we do know that the attention of the world has focused upon this mission in a way that it would not have done if this young lady was not there. The attention of the world, even the parts of the world that would in many ways rather not talk about it at all, has been grabbed by this young woman. It's possible that had she not been there, it may have ended in circumstances more similar to what happened in 2010, when a Turkish ship tried to break the blockade on Gaza, a ship called Mavi Marmara. Do you know this story? Hands up if you know this story. Because that saw 10 activists being killed. It caused diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel to be very badly affected, but many more were injured. 10 activists were actually killed when the Israeli military boarded a boat trying to do exactly what Greta Thunberg's boat was trying to do. So they would have been well aware of what a tragic, what a fatal escalation would look like, which will explain some of their behavior, some of their tactics. And inevitably, the Israeli government tries to turn it into a propaganda victory, saying it was Instagram activism and the show is over, ignoring the historic blockade, ignoring the consequences of it, and encouraging people instead to sort of laugh at the notion of the celebrities being transferred to Gaza through humanitarian channels. I don't know. I know I say that a lot at the moment, but it's about getting people who aren't talking about it to talk about it, right? That, I think, is the mission. And in one sense, it has worked. The usual suspects will be queuing up to attack this young woman because she is all the things they hate. She doesn't fear them, most obviously. She is courageous, clear-eyed, and authentic. You may not agree with her about things, but you can't fault her integrity. She is kryptonite to the kind of people that put characters like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson in power. She's absolute kryptonite to authoritarian regimes because she's managed to harness public opinion in a way that few people do. It's a once-in-a-generation phenomenon, what Greta Thunberg has achieved. But what has she achieved on this? Because if you were already talking about it a lot, is this a win? Is it now, as public opinion finally, long after, I think in a balanced universe, long after it should have done, public opinion, international opinion, even the UK government's opinion is shifting firmly into negative territory when it comes to what Netanyahu continues to do. But unless you're heavily invested in the story, in which case you didn't need this mission to be undertaken to draw your attention to it, I wonder if you knew. So, has it worked? 0345 6060 I do know, actually, what my opinion is. I said to you in the first hour sometimes I don't know what my answer to the question I'm asking you is until I've actually articulated it out loud. Yeah, I think this has worked incredibly well. I think that's why the response is being so negative. I think that's why they're so spooked. I think that's why the Israeli government is reduced to trolling on X. People who were prepared to risk their lives. And of course, the Israeli government can't admit that. The Israeli government can't say, oh, last time they did this, we killed 10 of them. So it's an incredibly brave thing for them to have done. We have a well-established history of shooting people like this on boats like that. But Greta Thunberg's status is such that the eyes of the world would have been on this boat in ways that perhaps were not the case back in 2010 when the Mavi Marmara undertook a similar mission. You've also got elected politicians on the boat, various activists from various countries. It's so easy when you look at things like this through the distorted lens of coverage. And remember, almost all the media in this country has been very slow to reach the conclusion that Netanyahu's mission has moved from retaliation to something much, much uglier. Whether you want to use the word genocide, as Kenneth Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch for 30 years, explained to me a month ago he feels duty-bound to use, or whether you're just comfortable leaving it at ethnic cleansing, is moot in a way. That's what's happening now. And Greta Thunberg felt that the world was looking away. Has it worked? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. So, I mean, I got one here. Here's a message. Has she mentioned the hostages? To which the answer is she doesn't need to, because everybody is talking about the hostages all the time. Any coverage of this issue is predicated upon the desire to see the hostages released, until you reach the point where Benjamin Netanyahu decided to abandon the plan that would have secured the release of all the hostages, or the fact that members of his government have made it clear that that was never their priority at all. But it's whataboutery to say that. It's very successful and effective whataboutery. But if you're on a mission to draw attention to the blockade of Gaza that has been in place since long before the October the 7th terror attacks, the only reason why you're saying, has she mentioned the hostages, is because you don't want attention to be paid to the continuing blockade and the continuing starvation of children. You can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. How many conversations about the terror attack on October the 7th contained recognition of the continuing plight of Palestinian people? How many corners in the British media would say, obviously this terror attack is absolutely disgusting, but, and then give you a quick history lesson on the plight of the Palestinian people? Answer, none, because it would have been whataboutery. At the time of that terror attack, the story was the terror attack. At the time of this mission to Gaza, the story is this mission to Gaza. Has it worked? Has it worked? How brave is she? She knows. I couldn't do it. Could you? Why do they hate her so much? Is it because she's a woman? Is it because she's, I don't know, she refuses to be frightened of them? Sort of cowardly men sitting in newspaper offices and studios around the world, absolutely livid with this young woman. For what? Holding up a mirror? Showing them the cowardice that lurks within them, that they spend their entire lives trying to ignore or deny? I don't know. I think this has been a great success. Do you?
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 11 is the time. People are jealous of Greta because she does what they are supposed to be doing, writes Miss J. Her actions speak louder than their words. They just waffle and judge instead of doing something. I agree and disagree. I mean, it's not a path that's open to everybody. But the risk they've taken, I think, is only understood in the context of what the Israelis did to 10 activists on a boat undertaking a very similar mission 15 years ago. Spoiler alert, they killed them. So how successful has this mission been? The mission statement been, or the mission intention being, to draw attention to the suffering of Palestinians and the continuing blockade on aid. 23 after 11 is the time. Paul's in Twickenham. Paul, what would you like to say?
Oh, thank you, James. Just a preliminary point, James, before I make the point I made to your producer. It's the use of the word activist. Very interesting. This has now become applied sort of one-sidedly in a way. You know, the IDF are activists. They're actively blowing up women and children. And in Trump's America, the activists are deporting.
It's an interesting point. It's become a negative. As you're suggesting, it's become a pejorative. Because I don't feel it's a pejorative.
No, not a pejorative.
What then?
Maybe to some people, activist lawyers, we hear about that in the immigration debate.
Yeah, we
Parliament.
do.
That is derogatory. It's more a sense that to say someone is an activist suggests that they're doing something out of the ordinary, and everyone else is just proceeding as we would expect a normal, decent human being.
I've always thought, you know me, mate, I could talk for an hour about the meaning of words, so I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but I've always thought it just had an air of voluntary to it, even in the context of lawyers who are probably being paid. That these are cases they've chosen to fight as opposed to cases that have come up on the taxi rank rules. So an activist outside of the legal profession, a civilian activist, a citizen activist, is someone who has taken up a cause on a point of principle for everybody. That distinction I drew at the beginning, rather than why are you marching today? Because they're trying to take away my money. Why are you marching today? Because they're trying to damage everybody. But do you see what I've always thought? An activist was someone who kind of acted for the collective good.
Well, I understand your point, James, and I don't dispute it. But I think what I would say is that the activists yesterday were Greta Thunberg and her fellow crew members, and the IDF forces which intercepted that boat sprayed it with paint or whatever chemical it was.
Yes.
But to the main point, James,
I hear you. Carry on.
The main point that yes, it was a success. I thought the best bit was when it shows that the IDF, the Israeli authorities, are not prepared to accept flour and nappies arriving on a beach, because since they intercepted the boat outside in international waters, they could have searched that boat, proved comprehensively that there was nothing on board but flour and nappies, and they still didn't let it in, which to my mind makes them look utterly inhuman, pathetic and weak. So that's one thing. But the spokesman who mocked David Merson, the sort of a fairly plump IDF spokesman who came on, who mocked Greta Thunberg.
You don't need to call him plump.
All right, I'm trying to give a picture of who he was.
All right, okay. No, I'm not familiar with the interview.
I'm skinny.
All right. I mean, that's a bit moot, but carry on.
Yeah, so he came on and said, the Instagram boat, and then he made a reference to Greta Thunberg's work for climate change and said she's been crying wolf about climate change.
Oh, Lord.
And I thought, well, that really is a very interesting remark, because if he doesn't think that climate change is real, then the idea that he's committing or being part of a group that is responsible for either an ethnic cleansing or a genocide is unlikely to enter his head. So, James, I am glad she went. I support her and all the other crew members. I think it's been a complete success. And as I think I mentioned the other day, it's like when Gandhi walked to the coast 200 miles and took a grain of some tiny grains of salt and was saying to the British Empire, leave us alone. And it was that tiny act, and for which they were attacked by the British authorities with clubs and so forth and sticks.
So I like it. I like the strains of history that you bring to your contribution, and of course the other parallel with Gandhi would be the establishment's response to his, his activism. I wonder what a better word would be. You're right, though. I'm going to dwell on that. I'm going to chew on that little semantic aside that you began with. But the central thrust of your point stands. People are free, of course, to respond to it. But Laura raises an excellent point in Stevenage. She doesn't need a mandate from the people as they do. She's free to express herself while they are bound by the chains of their office. She is free to say what she wants to, and that makes her very dangerous to them, especially to the more dictatorial regime. The more dictatorial a regime is, the more dangerous she becomes, because dictatorial regimes rely on brainwashing the people and cutting off any dissent to their mantras, which inevitably brings our eyes back to the United States of America, which is moving ever closer to becoming a police state or a fascist country, whatever you prefer. And largely for that reason, because they hate dissent, they hate critique. The weirdest thing about the last few years is the way in which the people who will shoot protesters or justify the shooting of protesters or the kidnapping of Greta Thunberg or arrest or whatever word you prefer, they're the ones that have managed successfully to portray themselves as protectors of free speech. Isn't that extraordinary? Remember when students would object to somebody with pungent views turning up on their campus, and people claimed it was a great threat to our free speech and that students were this, that and the other. And now Donald Trump is literally threatening to deport people whose opinions he doesn't like. And the free speech broskies seem to have gone a little bit quiet. Isn't that funny? I don't even think it was a plan. I think they're just too stupid to realise how stupid they are, which is both a curse and a blessing, I imagine. But the big, great champions of free speech over the last few years have got absolutely nothing to say about protesters being shot or people being literally deported and arrested for their, quotes, opinions, end quotes. And J.D. Vance deigns to lecture us on the incarceration of people who provoke pogroms as somehow being an infringement of their freedom of speech. Extraordinary times in which we live. More of your thoughts on Greta Thunberg's contribution to them. On 0345 6060973. It's 11:29. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:32. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So while we've been on air, Israel says it has begun to deport 12 pro-Palestinian activists, including the Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg. And some have refused to be deported. They will go before the courts, before a judicial authority to authorise their deportation. Greta herself has tweeted, I think, just departed Israel on a flight to Sweden via France and posted a photo of, I beg your pardon, it's the ministry that has posted that, and a photograph of her sitting on a plane. France's foreign minister writing, our consul was able to see the 6 French nationals arrested by the Israeli, so they were arrested by the Israeli authorities last night. One of them has agreed to leave voluntarily and should return today. The other 5 will be subject to forced deportation proceedings. So the question of how successful this mission has been, we're answering it both directly and obliquely this hour. I knew it somewhere in the back of my mind about the Mavi Marmara mission in 2010. I wouldn't, if you'd said to me, how many people were killed by the Israeli forces when another humanitarian mission undertook a task similar to what Greta Thunberg and her colleagues have undertaken, I would not have said 10. I can't say for certain that I would have remembered that people had actually been killed. So in terms of drawing attention to the bigger picture, that you chalk that up as a grim success, right? The Israeli ministry continues to refer to these people, including elected politicians. A correspondent from Al Jazeera, German, French, Swedish citizens, continues to refer to them as celebrities. And that is absolutely fascinating. Because why would they say the word celebrities with such contempt, do you think? I've got a theory. If Greta Thunberg hadn't been there, then the people on that boat might have ended up like the 10 people shot dead by the Israeli authorities in 2010. What would have happened if she hadn't been there? What's the difference between this boat and that boat? 15 years apart. Same protest, same mission, same blockade. Why do they hate celebrities so much? Well, we can't shoot the protesters if there's a famous person there. I don't know, it's just a theory. But it fits the facts available. Why would the Israeli ministry try to turn it into a story about celebrities on a selfie yacht? Because they know that they can't respond to this particular mission in the way that they responded to a very similar one in 2010. I mean, look at this. This is a quote from the Times today. The world's media watched the mission closely to see how Israel would react. Its government viewed it as a provocation to test its boundaries and resolve. In 2010, Mavi Marmara, a Turkish trip, tried to break Israel's blockade on Gaza. 10 activists were killed in clashes on board, leading to a 6-year rift between Ankara and Israel. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which is the group behind the Madeleines voyage, also sent a boat called Conscience to Gaza. But that boat was reported to have been hit by drones off Malta. And that attack was blamed on Israel by the group. The facts remain a little bit murky. But isn't it interesting? So that is an element at 11:36 of the story that I'd missed. I should have knitted those two strands together at 11 o'clock in my introduction. Why is Greta Thunberg there? Well, A, because she really cares about this cause, and B, because her presence draws a level of attention and focus that would render it impossible for the Israeli government to treat the passengers on this boat like they treated the passengers on the last one, whether it involves killing them or attacking their vessel with drones. But hey-ho, on we go. Mo's in Oxford. Mo, what would you like to say?
Thanks for having me. First of all, I think what Greta is doing is very important to highlight what's happening in Gaza. I was actually born and raised in Gaza, and I have one brother and his family and a sister there. The suffering that they are going through is not reported in the mainstream media. I spoke to my family 2 days ago during the second day of Eid. And basically, to give you an idea, my brother goes to the market and he tells me a kilogram of sugar is about £60. You know, for my sister to bake bread for her children, it requires a kilogram of flour. It's about £15 sterling. My family is privileged. We have money that we can send them through intermediary who take a massive commission. But 2 million Palestinians don't have that privilege, and they are really suffering. There is scarcity of food. There is competition for resources. You know, you need to have lots of capital to basically feed your family and survive. My brother has lost 30 kilograms in the last 6 months. Christ. And unfortunately, what we see here is that, you know, the mainstream media, the public institutions like the BBC, paid for by our license money, are glossing over the suffering. They're not reporting it, you know. And I'm going to
push back a little bit on that. They're not going to be reporting it as keenly as you are with your personal interactions with your brother. But two things. They can't get journalists in, as you know, because of the restrictions put in place by Israel. People are free to speculate on what Israel are terrified of being reported from within Gaza, but it is a meaningful obstacle to reporting. And some people are doing incredible work. And I don't want to patronize you, but just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The only objection might be that there continues to be an element of whataboutery to it. They continue to sort of add in contributions from people who clearly don't have the interests of the Palestinian people at heart. But they are doing, some outlets are doing a decent job of conveying some of the horrors and some of the tragedies that are unfolding.
That is true. But overall...
and also, while I'm on this particular role, people like Jeremy Bowen and John Simpson and Katya Adler and others, that they would, in a heartbeat, risk their lives to report on what is going on in Gaza, and they can't. And I know unintentionally, but you do malign them and their colleagues slightly when you go down the road that you just went down.
But generally, and you mentioned it earlier, with the newspapers basically using the Instagrammers in quotes, basically effectively peddling some of their freedom narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And overall, the media hasn't been forthcoming with the details. Mainly, I mean, you can understand because the issues for the average citizen is about their country and, you know, the daily struggles that they go through. I mean, Gaza is sort of a marginal issue. But I think it's very important to bring back to the forefront. You know, one of the comments my brother said to me, we feel a bit forgotten. Yeah. I mean, it's been 2 years. What's happened? And we don't see anything changing. All this talk about the injustices being done, but there is no concrete action, and there is no will, and there is a bit of a disconnect at the moment between what the public feels and what the politicians are doing.
It's a carefully cultivated disconnect, I guess. That's the point I was making earlier. Some of it is willful and a failure of journalism or diplomacy, but some of it is a consequence of policy, Israeli policy, with regard to foreign journalists and with regard to. I know you know. I'm just stressing it for people who thought we might have been at cross purposes with each other when we're not really. It's then a question of whether we are seeing what we want to see when we say that this has been a success, or whether we can objectively say that it has shone light into places that were previously ignored or dark.
That's true, and just one other point. I mean, literally the thing that really broke my heart. I mean, my brother was saying, you know, what's the difference between my grandchild and a Ukrainian child who's been killed by a Russian missile? Why? You can see the difference in importance. It seems that the world has a different value in our lives than another sort of white, green-eyed from Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that basically is sort of the crux of it. It seems, even though are aware of the issues, the details are missing. And what Greta has done is basically try to bring the issue to the front so that people can actually be curious about what's going on and hopefully dig deeper and apply pressure. Because, the latest, I think, national poll, something like 60% of the British population support imposing sanctions or putting pressure on the Israeli government. But yet again, I wonder what Starmer is doing or Lamy are doing, because we still hear of Daria flying airplanes from the bases in Cyprus, sending intelligence to the Israelis, sending aircraft parts and what have you. And the Prime Minister himself, 2 years ago, he said on record, I think on this station, Israel has the right to starve and withhold water and electricity from Palestinians as a way of defending itself.
He did, and listen, I'm not on his payroll for PR, but he was enormous pains to clarify and withdraw that comment almost as soon as he had made it. So, but again, he's the Prime Minister. The being dazzled by the headlights of an LBC studio is scant excuse, but that notion of this being a necessary corrective to coverage is pretty close to irresistible. Depressing though, Mo, for people like you and your family, that it takes a Swedish climate change activist to focus attention on what should be a matter of international shame.
I mean, this shame has been going for 70 years. I'm a second-generation refugee. My parents were not born in Gaza. They were kicked out of their homes,
right?
From Ashkelon, and this suffering has been ongoing for close to 70 years. It never came to the forefront of in the media to people to think about the injustices for the Palestinians. This event has sort of re-triggered some of that sympathy and the desire, hopefully, of people to push governments to resolve this issue. I mean, but unfortunately, there's no goodwill, mainly from governments. And I'll give you an example where...
Well, it's our government.
Governments can succeed. Yeah. In the 1980s, Menachem Begin invaded Lebanon, and the Israeli army and its Phalanges militias in Lebanon massacred about 3,000 Palestinians in Sabra and Shatila. And at that time, Ronald Reagan phoned Menachem Begin and told him he had to withdraw. And within 24 hours, the Israeli army withdrew its forces from Lebanon. And this is what I'm talking about. Israel as an entity is dependent on the West, and the West has significant leverage that it can apply. And unfortunately, that leverage and...
I don't know how. In the absence of the United States, I wonder how much leverage other countries have. Most obviously, the UK. But I don't think anyone would argue with your contention that they could certainly have either done more or been seen to have done more before this point. That's the nature, I guess, of an incremental increase, isn't it, Mo? The way in which that dial since the October the 7th atrocity was slowly turned. So when we first started asking the question, I think perhaps the Irish government moved as early as, for some reason I've got Valentine's Day of 2024 in my head, February the 14th of 2024, but we were still asking questions about when too much becomes too much. And I think in the context of the UK media that you've referred to, this was probably the first show to say, or the first outlet to say too much, excluding The Guardian maybe, say too much, which is already too much. And that was a consequence of talking to callers. But a diplomatic response is even harder to judge when the increase in activity or the lurch towards ethnic cleansing, or as some people prefer to call it, genocide, has been incremental. You can't spot the milestones. It's the boiled frog analogy. Again, I hope your family have better news soon, Mo. Gosh, they're inadequate words, aren't they? But they're the only ones I've got.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. Semantic departures, semantic asides. I think we've had one already this hour on the use of the word activism. Here's an absolute humdinger. Des is livid. Absolutely livid. I can tell you how livid Des is. He sent me this message 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 times. And he was at it yesterday as well. Yesterday he wrote, "Why do you never make any effort to pronounce non-English words correctly? The H in Thunberg is silent, but you plod on with your stupid-sounding English pronunciation. And then 12 times the same message today alone. Thunberg FFS. The H is silent. You're really not interested in changing stupid verbal habits and errors, are you? To which, Desmondo, I have only one thing to say. Do you say Paris or Paris? Because for the French, the S is silent. But for the English, it is not. It is an area I find absolutely fascinating. I had an English teacher, the best teacher I ever had, for the record, and she would always say Don Quixote. Everybody else on the planet would say Don Quixote. But you don't say Barcelona or Madrid. You say Madrid and Barcelona. So why do you say Don Quixote? You should say Don Quixote. I listen, nobody, or hardly anybody, with the possible exception of that amazing English teacher, is going to be consistent on this. Sometimes we're going to pronounce words as what the natives do, and other times we are not. But calm down, Des. Seriously, you'll do yourself an injury with that level of... You get repetitive strain injury, if nothing else, sending me the same message 12 times in a minute. David's been in touch to say, oh my God, I thought my messages were a bit over the top sometimes, James. You're telling me. Back to the question of whether or not this mission has been successful. Before I go back to the switchboards, a quick word from Alonso Gomendi, the fellow in human rights at the LSE, who spoke to us the week before last about his conviction that genocide is absolutely the right word to use, and the consensus now growing among lawyers in this field. But he has tweeted something on a similar theme to what we've stumbled into in the course of this hour. There have been 5 flotillas before this one, before Greta Thunberg's. 5 of them. How many of them did you know about? 2010, 10 people killed. 2011, no incidents. 2015, the crew was detained for 6 days. 2018, the crew was tasered. And earlier this year, drones shot at the ship just off Malta. As I mentioned earlier, that was back in May. How many of them did you know about? How much of those details were you across? That's got to be relevant. And the question that I'm going to take home with me today is this. What would have happened if Greta Thunberg hadn't been there? Or, to give Des his due, what would have happened if Greta Thunberg hadn't been there? Mary's in West Norwood. Mary, what would you like to say?
Okay, but what we are talking about is the fact that Greta was there, and you're asking whether we think it was a success or not that she was there on that boat. And I'm saying
whether the mission to draw attention to the plight of the Palestinian people has been successful.
Okay, whether the mission that was but the fact is that Greta's taken all the publicity, and I'm a long-time supporter of Gaza, 18 years, and I know about an even earlier Gaza flotilla than you've just mentioned. But I think that she stole the limelight, and what she was drawing attention to, and not deliberately. I'm sure in her heart she was, full of all the right intentions. Everybody on that boat was, and they were brave. I don't dispute it. But I'm saying, what did they draw attention to? You have to live in a cave under the ground or be a Zionist denier not to know that there are starving people in Gaza.
Well, you just heard Mo, just before you came on, whose brother is starving in Gaza, and he completely disagrees with you.
But the world headlines, anybody...
You can't just gloss over that. I mean, his brother is starving in Gaza, and he says people are not aware of it, and you say everybody is.
Well, I think that they might
in normal circumstances, who would you trust? The bloke whose brother is starving in Gaza, or the woman in West Norwood who thinks Greta Thunberg has stolen the limelight?
No, of course I trust him, and I trust him much more than me. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say
you're not. I'm teasing.
How much did the boat cost, for example, to go there when that money could have gone to charities feeding people on the ground?
Well, except it couldn't have done, could it? Because the charities, I mean, this is what they're drawing attention to. They couldn't get any food into Gaza.
No, there are loads of charities getting in, James.
There aren't. There haven't been since the blockade was introduced.
There are. I can't give you their names at the moment. There's Islamic Arabics. They send in doctors, and the American gets in. The United Nations are still going in with people. I know a person who works for the United Nations on the ground at UNESCO. Okay. They're limited, but they
United Nations isn't a charity. Isn't funded by donations.
UNESCO. Okay, not a charity then.
So you couldn't have taken the money from this charity and given it to another charity. So you're suggesting the blockade doesn't exist then? They've wasted their time drawing attention to it.
Of course not. I'm saying that the money could have been spent better elsewhere than on a boat. That's all I'm saying. And I'm saying that I don't think that they drew attention to anything very significant with what they did.
And nothing Mo said changes your mind as he describes the plight of his brother being now talked about in a way that it wasn't being talked about previously.
How is his brother being talked about in a way that it wasn't talked about previously thanks to Greta's vote?
Well,
I'm not quite sure.
You'd have to ask him. He feels that the spotlight of attention has been focused upon the people that she was trying to draw attention to. Maybe it's a problem that you think the attention has all ended up on her.
No, I really don't have a problem with Greta. I really don't want it to be about that. I don't think...
What would have happened if she hadn't been there?
They feel that.
What would have happened if she hadn't been there?
Well, they'd have been idiots now. I mean, last year, maybe 2 years ago, they would have killed them. Yeah, you're probably right. But now, the public opinion of the whole of Europe is turning against them. I think they know they'd have been idiots. That they had to make it as quiet as possible. They had to.
So if she hadn't been there, we may never even have known about it at all. But I sort of take some of your point. 11:50. It's unfortunate for you, I guess, that you came on immediately after a bloke whose brother is literally going hungry in Gaza, and is persuaded that this has been an incredible boon to his plight and his cause. But hey, we don't have to agree. Sophie's in Mitcham. Sophie, what would you like to say?
Please let me say everything I want to say. I'll try to be really quick. I absolutely believe that you are in search of truth, James, always, that you have this inherent fairness in your heart. But sometimes you say and do say things that get my back up, and that's a good thing. The last caller, the language she was using, and why does she have to caveat with I've been defending?
You are going to run out of time, and I don't think that you rang in to critique the last caller.
No, I didn't. I think we have conscious bias and we have unconscious bias, and the perspective that we will say whether it's successful or not comes from where we're looking. You spoke as a journalist when you thought that Mo was maligning, Western media, whereas Jeremy Bowen has written an excellent article just now on this whole issue.
Yes.
My point is that when the flotilla left, there was a live feed going on, and there was an app where you could follow the boat. It was intercepted by drones at some point. But if you were following the live feed, there were loads of Palestinians who were coming onto the chat. And one of those Palestinians was the award-winning journalist Bisan, who starts every broadcast with, "Hi, this is Bisan, I'm still alive."
Yes.
And she and other Palestinians who are being starved, whose children are being killed, they were saying that this gives us validation and hope.
Yes.
We are not forgotten. So it really doesn't matter what your success criteria is, or the previous callers from wherever she was from, and who used the word stolen. And I believe Mo was very gracious, very, very gracious in his conversation with you. But for me, I sit and I think
it's inarguable that it's been. I mean, I don't want to beat up the last caller when she's not here to defend herself, but I think it's a ridiculous argument that this hasn't been a success.
Of course it's been a success because it is highlighted. There are people who aid is not going in. People are starving. There is a famine. Yes, but there are people who don't know.
Yes, I think you're right. I think more people know now. More people know now than when this ship set sail.
And if it highlights a genocide happening in real time by the Palestinians who have been forced to log and evidence this genocide, then that's a good thing. And it doesn't matter whether Greta Thunberg or Thunberg, Swedish or Muslim.
I'm glad you're focusing on the important matter. Is the H silent?
It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter.
And for the record, I think we should also really stress that the blockade is preventing all aid from getting into Gaza at the moment.
Have you seen the images of the lines being made by this false Palestinian humanitarian fund, whatever?
Yes.
And they have been shot in lines. People have been starving people, and it is absolutely a mirror of what happened with the Jews in Nazi Germany.
Well, it's not, is it? I mean,
it is.
Well, I'm not going to let you just say that unchallenged. It's absolutely not a mirror of what happened with the Jews in Nazi Germany. That's a simple matter of historical observation. The death camps and the rise of the Nazis and the persecution of Jewish people and other minorities was undertaken on an industrial scale. But I guess you're entitled to your opinion, and I am entitled to refute it completely. And it was all going so well. It is coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Apparently it's Greta Thunberg, not Greta Thunberg. But, I mean, can we do an hour on Who Cares? We can't do an hour on Who Cares, can we? How important is it? What is the correct pronunciation? It's either that or the Burqa. I'm going to let you choose, because the Burqa is back in the news for all the most troubling reasons that you might expect.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12. I shouldn't be surprised that this has come back round again, but you may be surprised by my approach to this story. I've been doing this job for quite a long time now, longer than you might imagine. By that, I simply mean longer than you might imagine when you hear how bright-eyed and bushy-tailed I am of a morning. But the conversation about face coverings generally worn by Muslim women, burqas, as we tend to call them, as we generally call them, is one that I've always found really interesting and quite difficult. I didn't used to think as much about my opinions as I do now. I guess when you do this kind of thing for a living, you can go in 3 directions. The first of which is the least likely. I think when you start a job and then 10 years later you approach it in exactly the same way that you did at the beginning. Or you can think more than you used to do, which is what I do, largely because I love listening to you. And the areas in which I've changed my mind most profoundly over the years that we've been spending time together are the areas in which I have been educated by you. I mean, off the top of my head, obesity, mental health, neurodiversity, these are the areas in which I have absolutely been on journeys, prompted by stuff that you have told me. So you have there the basis for me now thinking more about what I say on the radio than I used to do. And the third path you can take is to actually think less. I genuinely think that if I had told you to vote for Brexit, for Boris Johnson, if I'd bigged up Liz Truss on the show, if I was a member of the Benjamin Netanyahu fan club, I would probably have stopped thinking entirely about things by now, just to keep the checks coming in. I'd be popping up every morning at 10 o'clock with opinions that I've lifted wholesale out of the Daily Mail, because to actually stop and think about any of this stuff would be a subject of such unfathomable shame that I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning, let alone get into the studio. So those are your 3 choices when you do this for a living. Never change at all, try harder, or try less. And I generally try harder. It doesn't always work, but you can but try. And I still find this subject one of the trickiest. You know, part of the problem is the people who call for a ban on the burqa. Inevitably, one of the people who's currently in Parliament for reform has called in Parliament for the ban on the burqa. I think it must have happened while I was away. And then the bloke who was the chairman resigned, and then he didn't resign, and then it turned out he had actually resigned, and he's been replaced by someone. I mean, it is, Farage gonna Farage. That's the way it goes. But just because awful people say something doesn't mean that it is always wrong. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And I want, if I can, to leave them out of this conversation, because if you hand somebody who indulges in nativist provocations a weapon, they will use it to hit people who are not natives. And that is what happens in some conversations about the burqa. But you can't abandon your own thoughts and principles simply because they occasionally align with the provocations and lies often of people who you are repelled by. So that is why we're talking about it. It's why it's back in the news. But it's not a very important element of the conversation that we are going to have together. I really, really hate it. And it flies in the face of some of my liberal tendencies. I'm aware and have heard compelling arguments that it is a matter of personal choice as opposed to something that is imposed upon women by their fathers or their husbands or their community. I don't see it as much as I used to. I don't know what that means. It might just mean that I've moved from one part of West London to another. I don't see it as much. I don't see it as much in Brentford as I did when I lived just off the Harrow Road, when I lived in Ladbroke Grove. For people familiar with the geography of West London, I probably see it more in Brentford than I did in Chiswick, where I lived previously. You certainly won't ever see it in Runcorn. I don't think, the constituency that the Reform MP represents, who decided to pull the pin out of this culture war hand grenade in the middle of PMQs last week. But I don't know how relevant that is. See it more at airports than anywhere else if I'm going long haul, but I haven't done that for years either. And every time, every time I see it, my feelings are complicated. My first, and is this patronising? My first and most overwhelming feeling is enormous pity. Enormous pity. I was at an airport once, I think in Bangkok, and I saw a woman eating an ice cream and having to lift her veil every time she wanted to put a spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. And I thought this was such a combination of ridiculousness and repression that my heart, I just squeezed. Like, you poor woman. And yet that's incredibly patronising. It's possibly even paternalistic. As for a man to feel that, if I was a woman feeling that, it would be a different impulse. What am I feeling? Some sort of medieval protection? It's my job to liberate her from this yoke of oppression? I honestly couldn't tell you. I just know that I felt enormously sorry for her. Enormously sorry for her. And you have to work out why. And the reason why is that you don't believe anybody would do it truly voluntarily. Even if somebody thinks they're doing it voluntarily, it's a result of brainwashing or gaslighting or societal grooming or whatever you want to call it. It's utterly, utterly horrible to me. And then you come to the question of whether or not it should be banned. Now, liberal democracies have banned it. France, I think, most obviously. And that seems to me to be, and this is where things get really tricky, philosophically, ethically, conversationally, hopefully. What's more authoritarian? Forcing women to wear it or forcing them to take it off? 0345 6060 973. What is more authoritarian? Because I much as I hate it, and I use that word very cautiously, it's a practice that I hate. I think it would be more authoritarian to order women to take it off than it would be to live in a society where they are sometimes ordered to put it on. No? What do you think? 0345 6060 973. Chris, I like these kind of messages. I certainly wouldn't wear it myself, but then I don't see anything wrong with wearing socks with sandals. You need a little bit of humour here. I probably also need a bit of a head wobble on the question of whether I should feel... Okay, look, the words I would use are pity and disgust. So I feel pity for the woman wearing it, and I feel disgust at whatever norms it is that has put her in it. Okay? Please feel free to challenge both of those responses on 0345 6060 973. You absolutely shouldn't feel pity, James, for me, because 0345 6060 973, or for any woman who is wearing this particular garment. Or probably a slightly easier task, I'd have thought, that you absolutely shouldn't feel disgust, or even how dare you feel disgust. These are the reasons why you shouldn't. 0345 6060 973. But the other element of the conversation that is going to become pertinent, I think, because of the way public discourse in this country is going at the moment, spoiler alert, backwards, is whether or not it should become a matter for politicians, whether it should become a matter for the state. And in a way, these two questions are absolutely inextricably linked. Because if you can persuade people that it is an entirely voluntary process, embraced enthusiastically by small but significant numbers of women up and down our islands, then the notion of it being banned by a government becomes a lot trickier, right? If you can successfully create the idea that it's incredibly oppressive and like a sort of form of sartorial straitjacket that women are effectively forced into by fear of disapproval or worse, then a government banning it could be depicted as an altruistic progressive move. But if it is a truly voluntary and desired state of affairs, and for a government to rip it away, to rip it off, figuratively, even literally, I don't know how you'd police this, that becomes a very different proposition. So you can't really separate the two arguments. I think the culture gap, if that's the right phrase to use, kicks in when you recognise the unlikelihood of you being persuaded that people are doing it through a form of objective voluntariness. That's a clumsy collection of syllables. Let me try again. That people, it is an objectively voluntary process. I don't think, and this might be me suffering from blinkeredness, I don't think I can believe that. I don't think I can ever really believe that. So you will tell me that it is an objectively voluntary decision you have made because of X, Y, and Z, and I will say, no, but it isn't, because that's not true, that shouldn't be the case, or that is you surrendering to other people's behaviours or your perception of other people's behaviours. I genuinely don't know. But I do know that I feel pity and disgust when I see it. One follows fast upon the other. For the absolute avoidance of doubt, it's pity for the women who wear it and disgust at the societal norms or the cultural practices that put them in a position where they either choose to or have to wear it. I feel no disgust whatsoever for the woman wearing it. I'm too busy feeling sorry for her. And it's perfectly possible I shouldn't be having any of those feelings, but there's no point me doing this every day if I'm not completely honest with you. So there it is. It's back in the news for the most predictable and grim of reasons, but the people bringing it back into the news, being fairly reprehensible humans, doesn't mean it's not a valid topic of conversation. It is likely, I think, to gather political momentum in the current climate because talking about things that divide us is what the status quo demands whenever the economics of a country begin to make some of us question whether things are actually fair. Don't start looking upstairs at all the billionaires and the fossil fuel barons. Start looking over there at some poor woman in a face mask. And I know I'm guilty of what I described, but I can't help being interested in it. I can't help what I find interesting, and I can't help what I feel. Should I? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:17, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I a couple of people raising the point. Let me get this out of the way so we don't have to waste any phone calls on it. I don't like anybody covering their face, particularly young ne'er-do-wells, bombing around on broken Lime bikes, wearing what we would call balaclava helmets back in my day. But I don't know how you'd legislate for that. You'd have to catch them first. And B, it's definitely not speaking to cultural norms or cultural practices or even societal values. So I don't know that the two work. If you're going to bring in a ban on face coverings, it'd have to be a ban on all face coverings. So it's a word I said I wouldn't use anymore, isn't it? The little scrote on a hacked Lime bike. London Centric, once again, have done some great work on why so many Lime bikes, if you're in a part of the country where they proliferate, why so many now are bombing past you making a hideous beeping noise, how that has happened and what it tells us. Jim Waterson setting up this a journalism site to do the kind of work he couldn't do when he was working in what we still insist on calling mainstream media. I really can't recommend it highly enough. It's called London Centric. It's great on Lime bikes if, like me, you have a vague obsession with them. But look, a face covering ban is a face covering ban. It just becomes political, cultural, and a lot more, what's the word I want, febrile potentially when it is Muslim women covering their faces. And that is what we're talking about this hour. Sharik is in Haringey. Sharik, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello,
first time I'm actually speaking with you, I believe. I sent a lot of messages and been on a couple of weather. Yes, pleasure to be on.
This is the big time now. This is the big one. Carry on.
So I have complex views, almost neatly coinciding with yours, I must say, even though I do come from it. I mean, my own background informs it. I was raised somewhat Muslim, but you can consider me long lapsed, whatever terms you want to apply to that.
Sure.
So it does inform it, but I don't come at it I'm coming at it as an everyday citizen.
Yes.
And I'd say on balance, I would say the latter, which ends up being more authoritarian in a free society, by which I mean banning the burqa.
To say you are not allowed to wear it is more authoritarian than a dad saying to his daughter, you have to wear it.
Yes, not by much, I would say.
Is it 52-48 by any chance, Sheree?
Oh my God, there you go again.
No, it does feel that way, doesn't it? Because it's about an entire society rather. But then how do you protect that girl if not through legislation?
So see, already the way you have addressed it is so different because you, from the beginning, you're talking about who's being harmed by it.
Yes.
And I agree with you that it's the women in question. And I will immediately concede the floor to any actual Muslim women who call in. I'm not claiming to speak on behalf of anyone at all except myself. But who is it harming? It's harming the women. And what do we do about it? Whose place is it to do
and we will
something
speak.
about
We will speak to these women. But I mean, and then it's a numbers game again, oddly, because you find 100 women who say, "Look, I love it, and my own husband doesn't like me wearing it, but I love wearing it," and we will find out why. And then you find 100 women who would tell us if they could that they hate wearing it. And
well, that's the nub of it, isn't it? Tell us if they could.
Yes.
So why don't we hear from them?
Yes.
So that's like a chicken and egg right there.
It is. I mean, but I think instinctively a ban feels like a more illiberal act than
I believe so.
Than the status quo.
If it's as simple as a security matter, right? Many people seem to treat this as some sort of concession being given to Muslims, and certainly some Muslims treat it as a birthright to enforce it, which is a different matter. But if it's as simple as a security threat issue, and that does exist to a certain extent, is it the biggest issue in the country right now? I would say not, but does it exist? Yes. That's very straightforward. In a public situation, say in a bank, in a post office, no one gets to cover their face. Simple as. Or at the airport. And no Muslims will object to that either, I believe.
I wouldn't have thought so. I think Kemi Badenoch has said recently that she won't let any woman wear one in her constituency surgery meetings. That seems an unnecessary provocation, but I guess that those are Kemi Badenoch's middle names, aren't they? Unnecessary provocation. But thank you. That's a nice kick-off point. A quick one here from Rob. I agree with you about feeling sorry and disgusted. They're my feelings too. But do you feel the same way about a nun's habit in Catholicism? I don't, but I see why people argue that point. I don't really. To me, the difference between covering your hair and covering your face is absolutely enormous. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's just to answer your question, Rob. I don't see any trouble at all in saying that one seems fine and one does not. It's also, becoming a nun is very much an act of an objectively voluntary act. You know, the idea of this isn't Hamlet. Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? Those days are long behind us. If you're becoming a nun these days, you're becoming a nun because you want to be a nun. I think a lot of us struggle to believe that every woman wearing a burqa, every woman covering her face is covering her face because she really wants to cover her face. But some will be, and that's why it is a politically charged question, a politically difficult question, and, as Sharik has just demonstrated, a potentially interesting conversation. Zaina is in Ilford. Zaina, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Well, I have an auntie that wears one, who I met yesterday, and we were having
for the first time?
And as she was leaving, she popped it on.
Yeah.
And it made me think, I actually said to her, you're going to get it, aren't you? And she kind of looked at me with a puzzled face, and she, puzzled eyes, and said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's all in the news at the minute. They want to ban it. And she was absolutely fine with that. She wears it because she wants to wear it. Her husband hates it.
Really?
Yes. And she's a great grandmother. She's not even young. So it's not even like, she's hiding her beauty or anything like that. She truly believes she's doing it for God, and she's fully submitting to that, and she loves it. And she didn't see, and I've asked her, do you have problems when you walk around? from people. And I don't know if she's oblivious or she doesn't care, but she says no.
Good. I mean, the last thing anybody wants, regardless of what their opinions on this subject might be, would be for anybody wearing the garment to be drawing negative attention or abuse as a consequence. And I mean, she's not here to tell me herself, but I mean, the sense of pity that I feel under your account of why she does it feels pointless, feels redundant and wrong. Absolutely.
I strongly urge you not to feel pity. Definitely.
Well, I'll do it. Well, I'll try.
She is very happy under her burqa.
So what is the religious rationale? Just remind us, because it's not by any stretch of the imagination a Quranic requirement, is it?
It's basically a form of modesty. It's a form of not bringing attention to yourself or people, making yourself look attractive to the other sex. But like I said, she's a great grandmother. She's not young, so
yeah, all right.
The thing is, I personally am a bit puzzled as well as to why she wears it.
She's invisible when she wears it, I think, and that might be quite pleasant in the modern society.
Yes. I mean, I have worn it, and it is actually quite comfortable. Yes, I have. Yes, just to try it out.
Really?
And it is quite.
Did you go out in it?
Yes, I did.
What was it like? What was different?
It's quite nice because what you said is you're invisible. It's quite comforting. It's kind of, you don't feel like people are.
Well, people are always checking people out in public. I mean, whether we like it or not. Women check men out, but I don't think many men feel threatened by that. Women get checked out to varying degrees all the time. And if you're wearing a face mask, you might draw attention, but it's for very, very different reasons. You're not getting checked out. No one's trying to make eye contact with you on a bus or anything like that.
Exactly. And I quite like that,
yeah,
actually.
I can see why. So I think I know.
Around in a cardboard box.
Yeah. No, I get it, but you don't like it enough to do it regularly, or indeed at all.
No.
Just as an experiment. So I think I know your answer to the next question, which is, what do we think about an actual government actually banning it?
No, that's a hard no for me. That would feel oppressive. That's not the kind of country we live in. It's a democracy. We should be allowed to do, wear what we want.
Well, I mean, I wonder if we had a referendum on either banning the burqa or banning people from listening to stuff on their phones without headphones on public transport. I think that the phones would probably come in way ahead of the burqa.
Yes.
In terms of things that why would it annoy somebody who is not wearing it or is not affected by anybody who is wearing it? Answer the pity and disgust that I began this hour with. But as I said to you at the time, that may turn out to be patronising, paternalistic and profoundly wrong. In the case of Zaina's auntie, it clearly would be. But here we are. Zane, thank you. Marcus is in Scunthorpe. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James. First time caller, long time listener.
Welcome.
I'm an ex-bus driver. I used to drive in Bradford.
Oh, yeah.
And one evening, autumn evening, about 7 o'clock, driving up towards Huddersfield, pull in, a lady, 3 children, and the husband, which I would assume is the husband, gets on the bus. Yeah. The lady's wearing a full burqa. Kids run off down the back of the bus. Oh, she barked orders at the husband and then told me, "Oh, sorry about that, chicken." She called me chicken, which is I'm from Dublin originally, and to be called chicken is a term of endearment.
Yes.
And so she sat more or less near, and she chatted to me all the way, occasionally barking orders, saying that she was with the husband's family all day and whatever else. Now, this lady was hilarious. Just some of the jokes, I can't tell on air, but she was wonderful. And my perception was a bit like yours. I always thought that ladies were forced to wear it.
Yeah.
And this was the malign thing that they had to walk 10 paces behind their husband or whatever else. This lady, she chose to wear that burqa. Nobody was forcing this lady to wear that burqa whatsoever. She was the boss. She was wearing the trousers in that household.
And the burqa.
Well, probably under the burqa. I don't know.
Got hot.
But I used to have the same so-called pity. You shouldn't be forced to wear it. But when you also think about it the other way, are we going to stop people wearing flares? Well, we should actually, but that's neither here nor there. Or stop women wearing miniskirts, or
it is the same question, is it? I don't know, because I mean, that the desire to remove burqas from society doesn't come from the same place as the desire to remove miniskirts. It come from almost opposite places. But you can sell them the same, can't you? It's about a woman's freedom to choose, like a woman's freedom to wear whatever she wants. And then when men start telling them what they can and can't wear, what's the difference between the man telling her she can't wear a burqa and the man telling her she can't wear a short skirt? What's the difference?
Well, do men actually tell women that they have to wear the burqa in the UK or in Western Europe?
They must do. I know that when we've had this conversation in the past, people have told me that is the case. And I used to take calls from men who would be at great pains to explain to me why their wife had to wear it. But I don't know, maybe even that's changed. Right? Maybe there's a demographic shift, and maybe they're not representative of enough people to justify an overall ban. So at the moment, no real support for a ban on the fairly obvious grounds that there is no proof that every woman wearing it is being compelled to or required to or forced to. As Tracy points out, you're unlikely to get calls from women who are forced to wear the burqa. Yeah, but unless you know they exist for sure, Tracy, what is the rationale for banning it? You see? It becomes theoretical, arguably even mythical. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. I just haunted by that question we asked in the last hour. What would have happened to that boat if Greta Thunberg had not been on it? Just on a bit of a crash course in the fate of the last boat to... Well, not the last boat, but an earlier boat to be attacked by Israeli forces while undertaking an attempt to break or draw attention to the blockade. It's extraordinary to think about what might have happened if Thunberg hadn't been there. The activists say the commandos started shooting as soon as they hit the deck. Israeli officials say the commandos opened fire only after being attacked with clubs, knives and a gun which was taken from them. Video released by the Israeli military stops just before the shooting begins. A UN inquiry was apparently unable to determine at exactly which point the commandos used live fire. So 6 ships in that particular flotilla boarded in international waters just off Malta, about 130 kilometres from the Israeli coast. Commandos landing on the largest ship by descending on ropes from helicopters and then opening fire upon the crew members, on the activists. 10 of whom were killed. So I'll leave you with that thought before we return to the question of the burqa that we're discussing this hour. What would have happened if Greta Thunberg hadn't been on the boat? Or Greta Thunberg, if you prefer. 12:35 is the time. Hanisa is in Egham. Hanisa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I've actually spoken to you a while back, about, 20 years ago. I've been listening to you for absolutely ages now.
Say, it makes us both sound so old, Hanisa.
No, do you know what? It's quite sad because that you would pity somebody like me, because yes. I respect you so much, especially your views on so many things. Honestly, I have the same views as you, most probably 9 times out of 10. And to tell you the truth, for somebody to pity me, where I've just spoken to your colleague on the line, and I said, look, this was my decision. I said, I wore this before I got married. This defines who I am. This is who I am, and my path to Allah, to God, where I believe that this is what He is asking for me. This is from me, and this is my choice. This is what I have wanted to do. There's nobody, believe me, that could turn around and say, you must do something without me questioning it. I have looked into it, I have researched into it, and this is what I believe is the correct position. Now, for somebody to turn around and say, you can't do what you believe is correct for you, that would be more authoritarian, or somebody oppressing me than myself putting on a face veil. And it does make me sad, because I heard, was it Zaina? I think she was talking about her auntie. And yes, do you know what? When I do go out, I don't get like people saying things to me, because I try to get rid of that misconception that, especially when I'm out, I will make sure that I strike up a conversation with whoever is around me, so that they get actually, she's like us. She laughs, she jokes, like the chap that was on just before.
Yeah, the Irish fella, the Irish bus driver.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, no, let them see that we're not all burqa-clad terrorists out there. We're not. We're exactly like any other woman who worries about her children, worries about the house bills, worry about what I'm going to make for dinner at night time. All I do is I just wear that face veil, and that is the difference between myself and any other woman.
I can't argue with anything that you've told me, so I'll just ask a couple of questions if that's okay.
Of course.
When did you start wearing it? How old were you?
Oh, God, now you're asking me about age.
Yeah.
Right,
you started it.
I was 23.
Okay, gosh.
And I'm going to be 50 this year, so what, 27? 27 years now.
Did your mum wear one?
No. And to tell you the truth, my mum was absolutely appalled. My dad didn't like it. When I started to wear the hijab, my mum was like, your brother went to university, your sister went to university, they never did this. Why are you doing this? So they didn't like it at all.
And what did you say when they asked you that question?
What did I say? I just said, Mum, Dad, this is what I believe is correct. Will you not support me in what I want to do? And alhamdulillah, I got their support. Yes, they weren't happy with it, but I know that eventually they realised that this is who.
It's entirely sincere. I think the phone line got cut off there. I'll try and get Hanisa back because there's one more thing I want to clarify with her, but I can't argue with her. Can I? The question when it comes to legislation, of course, is absolutely contingent upon a perception that I clearly have that most women wearing it would rather not. That in a completely free universe, most women wearing it would rather not. And I don't know how you judge that. But if you find half a dozen women who are being forced to wear it, then the only way you can free them is to punish somebody like Hanisa. And that is really uncomfortable, that idea of punishing somebody who clearly wants to wear it. Hanisa's back, I think. So I'm trying to work out where... I completely respect your rejection of my pity, and in your case, it's clearly entirely inappropriate. But I'm trying to work out where some of the deeper objections may lie, and it is. So, I mean, you must believe in some sense that women who don't wear it are not as close to God as you are.
No. Not at all.
Well, hang on a minute. You can't have it both ways, can you?
No, yes, you can. Because listen. Because this is my path. This is the path that I have chosen. And if another lady decides that is not her path, we're still both continuing on that same path to God. So for me to turn around and say, actually, I'm better than you because I wear it and you don't, it's not for me to judge. It is for God to judge. God is the judge, not me. But this is what I believe is correct. In fact, I always say to my friends, don't think I'm any better than you because I wear this. I'm still struggling with my faith the way anybody struggles, the way you guys are struggling with your faith.
Yeah.
This is just what I believe is correct. So I do it. I would never turn around and say to somebody that I'm better than them because that just truly isn't the case.
And if that's the message they receive from your choices, that's a them problem, not a you problem.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, it clearly is. And how do we know? How do we get a handle on how many women are not like you? How many women who wear the veil, are in a perfect world would rather not? Well, no, not even in a perfect world. In a different scenario. Yeah, go on.
Right. To tell you the truth, I was just speaking when I spoke to your colleague on the line. I said, look, I do totally understand. I said, look, if I was in a place like maybe Afghanistan, where it is an actual Sharia country, a Sharia ruled country, and of course these women most probably don't have that choice. If they didn't wear it, there would obviously be severe repercussions. However, for myself, in a country where I can not wear it, and I choose to wear it, all the women that I know that wear the niqab have done it because they have wanted to wear it, not because they're forced to wear it at all. And I think the misconception is that she's been told or forced by her husband or her father or whoever it is that she must wear it. That truly, especially in this country, is not the case because I have that choice that I don't need to wear it. There is nobody, if my husband did force me, I could get somebody to say, right, he's forcing me to wear this, and I wish to I don't wish to wear this. However, in this country where I have that choice and I've made my choice that I wish to wear it, for somebody to take that choice away from me would
be as bad as somebody inflicting it on you in the first place.
Yes.
I think that's helpful, what you're reminding us of Afghanistan, because that must be where the kind of cultural sense memory comes from. That you know, reading about the Taliban, reading about the police in Iran, and the imposition of these sort of practices upon women who are clearly resistant and clearly reluctant, but have their choices taken away from them. And you just allow that by a sort of process of cultural osmosis. People like me end up thinking that people like you must be victims to similar pressures, when you are quite clearly, Anissa, nothing of the sort.
No.
Nothing of the sort. Can I ask how it feels? I mean, you've been wearing it for so long, you probably can't remember what it's like not to be wearing it. But how does it change your daily experience?
No, not. Do you know, I've been wearing it for about 27 years now. So for myself, I'm not going to lie. When it is hot out there, it does get hot, and you're in the car and you're trying to breathe, and you think, oh my Lord, not breathe, but it's just like, obviously you just want to have that cold air on your face. I'm not going to lie. Anyway, if somebody said to you, actually, no, I'm fine with it in the hot weather, you know, okay, that's whatever. But do you know what? No, I have worn it all the time, and you know what? I do not find a problem with it
and it's about your personal relationship with God rather than your potential relationship with people around you, or is it a bit of both? No, because when you say potential about people around me, that would mean that I'm actually succumbing to what they think that I should. Well, I was thinking more about what we touched on with Zaina about the, you know, and this is something that I think women are much more conscious of than men are, because of the the direction of traffic. You know, the age at which you notice your daughters being eyed up, as it were, on public transport or things like that. This exempts you from a lot of that, from almost all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know, honestly, James, this is one thing that I have always kind of said to somebody. Yeah. Unfortunately, I said, look, women, unfortunately, are not all women and not all men are like this. Yeah. But we are deemed as, unfortunately, looked at as sexual objects, sexual desires. You have the highest kind of like billions going into the sex industry, the porn industry, whatever. You have all of that. So, you know, that does show you that men do see women in a certain way, where they do look at them just in a sexual way. And for myself to say, well, not all men are like that. Of course, they're not all like that. You have respectable, decent guys out there, but you also have, on the other spectrum, you have men that are not like that. So instead of me having my face to my hand to my face and doing a yo-yo up and down, we put the face veil on, he's all right, oh, he's not, I'll put it back down. Instead of me putting it up and down all the time, just leave it on, so whoever the respectable guy is has no problem, and the one that actually doesn't get to see me, it's not going to be my problem.
That is absolutely fascinating. I'd never thought of it that way around before, because there's two things there, isn't there? There's the hashtag not all men, which sometimes feels a little bit hackneyed, but there's also I think I would once have argued, possibly last time you rang in on this subject 20 years ago, I might have said that means you're surrendering to the bad men. You're letting the bad men define your place in society. But that feels a bit flimsy now. That doesn't quite leave my lips with the weight that I felt that it used to. Because why shouldn't you just do what makes you most comfortable and most happy?
And this is what makes me most comfortable. This is who I am. And for somebody to turn around and take that away from me would be taking away a part of who I am.
Thank you again, Anissa. I'll try harder on the pity front, because it's an absolutely ludicrous feeling to have in the context of someone like you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I got to say, James, writes Rob, I came into listening to this hour with particular views about women wearing the hijab, mainly pity. But this caller, Anissa, has changed my mind too. She was a great caller. That's the point, isn't it? Is that even if for every Anissa you could find somebody wearing the face veil who would really rather not, but has been sort of compelled to do so by society's expectations, religious expectations, religious indoctrination, an overbearing father or a well-meaning husband who believes that it is necessary, then even if you could find a counterbalance to every Anisa, and at the moment I can't, it wouldn't justify a government ban, would it? It wouldn't to take away the freedom to do something that you want to do, which harms nobody. You can certainly introduce circumstances in which you are not permitted to cover your face in kind of interactions with authorities and the like. But I don't know. And yet there we are. That's what I felt. That's what I felt at 12 o'clock. And it's not going to change in the space of one phone call or 1 hour on the radio, but I'm with Rob on that. It certainly makes you think. Katrina is in Oslo. Katrina, what would you like to say?
Hi. I just wanted to pick up on something that you said at first about placing clothing coming from different places, whether it was a burqa or the miniskirt. I don't agree at all. I think they come from exactly the same place.
No, that's what I said as well.
Policewoman.
Yeah. No, I said.
Sorry, that was my misunderstanding.
No, well, it's my failure of explanation, actually. So they address completely different things, but they come from the same place. Yes. Because one is addressing perceived immodesty and one is... Mm-hmm. Yeah, anyway,
sorry. I think I'm just repeating what you've just said, to be honest, but I think it makes as much sense to help women who are being oppressed by oppressing them through a ban as it does to try and stop children from hitting each other by hitting them. It's just, there's no logical, I don't understand.
Well, you say that. Jamie's texted to say, "You're breaking my brain, James," which I think is kind of, which is where it is, because we can't base a legislation, and this is why it's important perhaps to leave the type of political figures who try and turn this into a hot potato out of the equation, because there's no way they're coming from a place of concern. They've just spotted a weapon with which they can hit people from a certain minority. Absolutely. And so they're going to take up the invitation with alacrity. But we don't know, do we? We don't know how many women wearing it would rather not.
No.
And I mean, I don't know how you would ever know, really.
Yeah, there are lots of things that we don't know as well. In that sense, we don't know.
And then
women who are being abused domestically. But
what's the score in Norway? Is it?
I was wondering about that as I was calling, because I don't notice it a lot in Scotland, and I don't notice it a lot here. Certainly not in the same way as when I'm in London. But I think that's to do with how homogenous the.
Right, it's just simple demographics, isn't it? It's just numbers, a numbers game.
We've got 5.5 million, mainly white people in both countries. Yeah. So it's, I
think they're banned in Denmark, unless that's just one of those weird things that's stuck in my brain for reasons I can't quite remember.
I can believe that. I wouldn't want to follow Denmark's approach any more than I would France's in that way. I don't think I want to move towards a more Islamophobic country, if at all possible.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I also think of asking the question about who is this hurting is really important as well, because I think when it comes to what's hurting women right now, things like Mr. Farage now talking about abortion at 24 weeks worries me a lot more than women wearing burqas or trans women in bathrooms. I think there's a lot of stories that are being screamed at us, and I just think this
well, don't forget
not
that
my concern.
Mr. Farage considers himself to be part of the same phenomenon as the self-described misogynist and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate. So it's
money from the same people.
It's possible he doesn't. I don't know about that, but it's possible he doesn't have the best interests of women at heart, Katrina. Perish the thought. Yeah. So who is it hurting, as opposed to who does it give an opportunity to inflict hurt to? And I don't think it's naive or ignorant to believe that there must be some women in this country who are in a similar situation to women in a country like Afghanistan, where they have no choice, because to exercise technical choice would result in things that would be pretty grim, whether it's a form of ostracisation or worse. And again, Maggie points out, you won't hear from any women who are forced to wear the face veil. I might do. I think I have done in the past. I can't quite remember. It's so long since we talked about this. That's what I mean about public discourse going backwards in this country at the moment. But that doesn't mean that there's loads of them out there not phoning me, Maggie, does it? Any more than it means that there's none of them out there. Melissa is in Edinburgh. Melissa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm just
Hi, I'm just phoning from a kind of a mixed perspective, really. I was born in a Muslim country, and I have a lot of Muslim family, and I do have members of my family who do wear the burqa.
Okay.
I've never personally worn the veil or have been particularly practicing, but I am a feminist, and I think I've been deliberating in the same way that you have about whether I would actually support a ban, and I think probably 52-48, I probably on balance would actually accept, would go for a ban being the better thing.
Because you believe it would help enough women to justify the unfairness being inflicted on women like Anissa?
Exactly, yes. I think even if there were, I mean, it is impossible to know how many women are forced in this country.
Do you know any?
I don't personally, but to be honest, I don't. Yeah, and I think we touched on the point that I'm not sure that the women that are forced to wear the burqa would necessarily have the freedom or ability to phone in a radio station.
No, that's the chestnut here, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think even if it's a relatively small number, even if we're talking, 10 women, 15 women, 20 women who are being forced to wear one. If a ban was put in place and it kind of liberated them from that, it's, I think on balance probably still worth, their liberation is worth, even of a few women, is better than the inconvenience or the upset that might be caused for the women that would choose to wear one.
Yeah, except that we're back to the numbers game, because neither of us know. I mean, if there are a million Anissas and 5 people who are in a sort of Anglo-Saxon version of Taliban oppression, then it wouldn't work, would it? At some point, your pendulum would swing, and you'd say, well, no, that's not worth it. Liberating those 5 isn't worth persecuting that million.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, they would still be able to wear the veil. There's still a lot of ways to practice your religion. Across all the. I'm not just talking about Islam. Jewish women wear the wigs.
Yes.
The Haredi women.
Something visceral about covering the face, though, don't you think? Something a bit visceral about it. A bit. I mean, it speaks to a slightly different psychology than covering the head. I was educated by nuns for the first few years of my school days, and then actually I was educated by men in dresses.
Yeah,
monks, and no wonder I'm such a mess.
I think we're only talking about kind of banning the most extreme version of.
Why do men never have to cover their faces in order to get closer to God?
Well, exactly, and I think actually one of the closest kind of the best argument I heard when I was a teenager from one of my family members about wearing a veil was, men they can't help themselves. They see a woman and they will they basically check you out, and they can't you can't stop that from happening, and therefore it puts the onus on the woman to kind of cover herself up so that liberates her. I actually kind of understood that argument at the time, and that's where that kind of liberation aspect comes from. But now, having grown up a bit more and kind of become more of a feminist, it has made me realise it's not a lot. It's not much of a step to go from that to victim blaming, for example. Or
men can't help themselves.
Ultimately, exactly. Men can't help themselves.
So we're back to the miniskirt.
On the woman to cover herself up.
Yeah, we're back to the High Court judge telling a victim of rape that she shouldn't have worn that skirt.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gosh,
so
well done.
I think ultimately the whole thing is a product of patriarchy, and I think if we're talking about societal shifts and kind of trying to move away or liberate women as a whole, I think as a feminist I would very much go for yes, if there's a ban would
do you want to know something crazy?
Yeah.
What's the time now? Is it 12:58? So Claire sent this message in at 12:58, about 4 seconds before you finished talking. She sent this whole conversation does not address patriarchy. How mad is that? Literally, as she sent that message, you addressed patriarchy. I thought I had, but I would say that, wouldn't I? I just used a different word. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, everyone, this hour in particular, because that conversation can obviously go down fairly stupid routes, and it categorically didn't today, which has At least as much, if not more, to do with you than it does with me. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the new LBC app, where you can read and watch the latest from LBC, put your news categories in the order you want, as well as pause and rewind live radio and listen to a wide range of podcasts. Download it now, the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4, but now, standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's time for Asma Mir.
James O'Brien on LBC.